the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 251 New Citizens. Harvey, for the first time, led a team of personal guards to the territory's city hall. He personally sat in the private office where Reiner had previously worked and summoned Haru, the head of the construction department. Ever since the territorial army arrived in Jackdaw Town to establish a refugee shelter, a steady stream of civilians had arrived daily from the southern reaches of Jackdaw Ridge. To prevent these recently recovered individuals from spreading the plague to the local population, Harvey had them relocated to an area outside the eastern city walls, where he erected a cluster of temporary huts for these newly arrived residents. Located close to the city walls, the temporary huts could be monitored by the permanent defense forces stationed there, and patrols were frequent day and night, ensuring no concern for them being harassed by wild animals. However, this group of refugees numbered over 4,000. If the Federation's subsequent measures to control the plague weren't prompt enough, Harvey predicted the influx would continue to grow, potentially exceeding 5,000, representing half of the local population of the frontier territory. Simply providing these refugees with food and clean drinking water wasn't a major problem. Since last winter, the frontier territory hadn't experienced a food crisis, and they rarely purchased food supplies from the southern border through the Dragonstone Merchants Guild. In late summer, Reiner even asked Harvey if they could grind up the large amount of old wheat in the storage area to use as livestock rations, freeing up new storage space for this year's autumn harvest. The most important issue right now was housing for these new residents. It was early autumn, and the north wasn't as warm and humid as the south. The Divine Spine Mountains separated them, resulting in a significant temperature swing between day and night. Currently, the refugees were able to make do in huts. At least they could keep out the rain and wind, and the sudden chill kept them safe from mosquito bites and other common infectious diseases. But winter was just 2 or 3 months away. Winter in the northern wilderness was a freezing cold, and staying in a wooden shed was no different from sleeping in the open air. Without thick fur clothing and a constantly burning fireplace for warmth, most people wouldn't survive the long, harsh northern winter. This meant that Harvey had to manage the busiest harvest of the year in a disciplined manner, while also recruiting workers to build sturdy houses for at least 5,000 people before winter arrived. My lord, we have no shortage of cement. It's piled high in our warehouses, ready for immediate use, but the problem is, I don't have any staff. Construction Minister Haru stood erect at Harvey's desk, sucking in his slightly bloated stomach, and complained with a worried look on his face. The construction department had always been a tedious repair shop, only posting notices to recruit construction workers when major projects were underway. Upon completion, the workers were immediately paid and laid off. But with the autumn harvest approaching, those subjects who normally didn't have regular jobs had already been snatched away by the lucrative short-term wages offered by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Processing Factories. Raising a construction team of 1,000 people at this point would be incredibly difficult. That's not my business. My order is to see your construction team begin work on the new residential area I've drawn in a week. Whether you ask the Ministry of Agriculture for people or the Ministry of Industry for them is your business. At most, you can offer a higher salary and ask your immediate boss, Leonardo, for a budget. Haru frowned, his eyes immediately reddening. He mumbled something under his breath and was about to burst into tears, causing Harvey to burst into laughter. All right. I was just kidding. How could there be no one? Aren't those new residents who have just been pulled into the temporary shantytowns your ready-made labor force? But I heard, most of those who managed to escape to the border are young and middle-aged men. Can't the dozens of officials under you recruit them directly? This way, you can immediately find them a 3-month job, and provide them with a good salary guarantee, laying the foundation for their future foothold in the territory. Haru rushed out of the office happily with a blueprint of the new residential area in his hand, leaving Harvey alone in there, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Before he could pick up the tea and take a sip or two to relax for a moment, Yurio, the superintendent of the territorial police department, walked in wearing a neat gray uniform. "Sir, In the refugee shantytowns, there have been several incidents of robbery and brawls in the past 2 days alone, Uriel reported gravely. And this afternoon, during the food distribution, some people even openly clashed with the police officers maintaining order over issues like queue jumping and food portion sizes. What? They've only been here for 2 or 3 days, and they're already causing all this trouble. Harvey frowned, slightly dissatisfied. Compared to the simple and honest nature of the desert refugees, the people of the southern border are indeed more cunning and calculating. Even before the locals and the new refugees have even been allowed to mix, they're already seeing frequent instances of bullying. Who knows how much conflict will ensue when they finally move into the territory? The police department must curb this phenomenon immediately. We must not let them band together, otherwise it will be even more difficult to deal with them. Let the defense forces get involved and cooperate with you to maintain security and order in the shantytowns. Arrest all these thugs who are fighting and causing trouble, and try and punish them in front of the new subjects. Either hang them up and whip them, or handcuff them and parade them through the streets. In short, within this month, I want to see that the order in the shantytowns is exactly the same as that in the territory, understood? Lord, those who stand up and lead the trouble. Harvey glanced at Uriel and said lightly, just kill the chicken to scare the monkey, no need to inform me separately. After the work report was completed, Uriel still stood there and did not leave, quietly waiting for Harvey to continue reading the documents. Huh? Why are you still here? Do you want to wait for me to get off work and follow you to the castle for dinner? Harvey raised his head and teased. Uriel then said awkwardly, Sir, there is one more thing I need your consent and approval for. He raised his hand and took out a metal baton from his waist, which was specially issued to police officers for daily patrols and arresting criminals. He said hesitantly, my police officers are secretly discussing that the weapons issued to the police department are too unintimidating. They are usually used to deal with those drunken and troublesome residents in the territory, and they are still somewhat effective, but when facing those refugees from the south, unless they are hit on the head with a stick, it is better to brandish swords and sharp blades to scare them. When distributing relief food in the shantytown today, those who took the lead in the riot completely ignored the iron bars in the hands of the police officers and directly surrounded several police officers by relying on their numbers. If the defense forces on the city wall had not arrived in time and fired a shot that directly shattered the leader's knee, I am afraid the situation on the scene would have been out of control. Harvey smiled and said, why? You want to replace your standard weapons with swords that are more lethal and deterrent? Uriel puffed out his chest and said bluntly, no, sir, I want to apply for the police department to be uniformly equipped with magic guns. Chapter 252 Celebration and Planning. Harvey sat in the castle's study, leaning back on a soft sofa as he verbalized the plan for the harvest festival. Reiner stood beside him, rapidly writing down the plan in a notebook. The idea of holding a celebration after the autumn harvest had been a spur-of-the-moment idea on Harvey's part. After all, the people of the frontier territory currently had very few festive occasions. Besides the military's semi-annual target shooting competition, the only remaining activity was the annual winter festival. Although Harvey later organized rugby teams for the army and police, and built several public chess and card rooms and officers' clubs throughout the territory, the public still lacked leisure time. So, as early as the previous year's winter festival, Harvey had publicly stated that the benefit of working 6 days and resting 1 day would be clearly written into the territory's laws and regulations, and that all departments must strictly adhere to it. This mandatory leave decree was truly baffling to everyone. After all, whether they were refugees from the desert or escaped slaves from the southern border, they had always lived a life of toiling away. Even when the deep snows of winter prevented farming and herds of cattle and sheep needed no grazing, they were frequently called upon by noble lords of various regions to build castle walls or perform menial labor and hard labor for their lord's spring war preparations. Huddling in a shanty in the slums with hunger was hardly a vacation. This led to a certain discomfort when the people discovered that every 6 days of work gave them 1 day of free time. Eventually, even in the frontier territories, even requesting a day off would require their supervisors to schedule overtime, requiring them to resort to extra connections. This truly amused Harvey. Since no one wants to take a vacation, then just create a bunch of large-scale festivals and celebrations so that they can't help but participate and have to adapt to this social model. The winter celebration at the beginning of the year, the harvest festival at the end of the year, the military shooting show every 6 months, and the rugby games every month. Harvey counted on his fingers and turned his head to Reiner and said, "What other names can we use to come up with some new festivals and activities?" Reiner closed the notebook and reminded him in a low voice, "I heard that the great nobles in the southern border like to reward their servants and subjects lavishly in their fiefdoms during their birthday banquets. You can follow suit, my lord." Harvey coughed awkwardly twice. The thought of himself sitting in a carriage, parading around the territory and throwing money around gave him goosebumps all over his body. "Don't always make a fuss about me. This proposal is rejected." Upon hearing this, the city manager could only shrug his shoulders and said helplessly, "Then there is no other choice. As far as I know, the only festivals that civilians were allowed to participate in the past were the birthdays of the gods and the glorious masses of the church. Apart from that, everyone worked almost all year round without a break. As long as there was no work for a day, the whole family would go hungry." After finishing his morning work, Harvey had a quick lunch and hurried to the newly planned residential area. Looking at the bustling construction site, he nodded with satisfaction. The pioneering territory, now surrounded by towering walls that are more than 10 miles long, has undergone earth-shaking changes compared to the desolate ancient wizard ruins. Except for the Lord's Castle area where Harvey lives and does activities on a daily basis, which still vaguely retains some of the original greenery and style, the other areas that were originally primeval dense forests are completely new. The makeshift wooden houses along the river have been completely demolished and replaced with uniform two-story gray cement brick buildings. The residential area, now divided by the territory's bustling market area, is neatly arranged in a pattern into open residential communities. This vast residential area occupies approximately 3/5 of the entire pioneering land area and accommodates 6,000 to 7,000 residents. A small number of local residents live scattered across farms, industrial areas, and mining areas further outside the city walls. With the construction of hardened concrete roads, these residents can easily and quickly travel to various areas within the territory using bicycles, which are becoming increasingly popular. For the new residential communities, Harvey no longer intends to use the traditional two-story townhouse model. Instead, he will expand the single-story area, converting the cement brick buildings into two-story townhouses, ensuring that each floor can accommodate a family. He also followed a real estate development model of his previous life's Earth, dividing the houses into different layouts, such as 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. This would facilitate the appropriate allocation of new housing based on the size of the families of new residents. Of course, these houses would remain the same as before, simply rented by the lord to commoners, with a monthly rent deducted directly from their salaries, effectively paying taxes. The Minister of Construction, looking shaky, greeted Harvey, who had come to inspect the work. He couldn't help but shudder when he saw the lord having his personal guards hand over another stack of architectural blueprints. "Near these public schools in the municipal district, I plan to build a few apartments. These will be used for the alchemy apprentices I'm hiring for the alchemy lab, as well as the new magic apprentices joining the territory." The alchemy apprentices Chris brought with him, and later, the magic apprentices Duarte brought in, were all relatively young teenagers. Even though Harvey paid them their full salaries based on their daily work, he hadn't considered allocating them individual housing. Consequently, these teenagers still resided in the territory's only 2 ghost houses. This was extremely inconvenient for their rapid integration into the pioneer territory. Harry wiped the sweat from his face with his sleeve, then carefully unfolded the blueprint in front of Harvey and studied the location of his newly planned project. The municipal district doesn't cover a large area to begin with, and this piece of vacant land near the academy is indeed not large enough to build townhouses. I had planned to have Mr. Egno create a small street garden there." The Minister of Construction raised his head as if waking from a dream, and asked hesitantly, "My lord, what is an apartment?" "An apartment is a building that is taller than a 2-story brick house." Harvey stretched out his finger and pointed at the simple blueprint he had drawn. "It cannot be built entirely with bricks and cement. Instead, it should be like I taught you how to build a city wall before. Add strong steel bars to the columns and beams of the house, and then pour concrete to form the whole thing. This way, the stability of the house structure can be guaranteed. Not to mention building only 3 or 4 stories, even if you want to add 10 stories, there will be no problem." Harry looked confused and muttered to himself, "Build a house like building a city wall, it doesn't matter how high it is." He shuddered, a sudden, profound thought flashing through his mind. He closed the blueprint and discreetly wiped the black iron medal he always wore on his chest. It was a tribute personally bestowed upon him by the Lord after the completion of the territory's walls, hailing him as the cornerstone of the territory's construction. My lord. I understand. Harry trembled with excitement. Once these projects are complete, let me renovate your castle for you. With enough manpower, I can build you a towering tower. Chapter 253, Bridge Across the River. On an autumn afternoon in the north, the sun, though bright and radiant, hung high in the sky, but it could no longer provide the scorching heat to bake the fertile soil. Wearing a rather comically wide-brimmed straw hat, Reiner led a team of agricultural officials through the endless expanse of wheat, carefully inspecting the wheat that was about to be harvested. This wheat, sown in late spring, had matured after 4 or 5 months of meticulous cultivation. The endless wheat fields resembled a golden ocean, each sheaf thick and full, drooping heavy in the breeze. Even the refugees from the south, temporarily housed in the huts at the foot of the eastern city wall, could not help but gaze enviously at the wheat fields. This year was sure to be a bountiful harvest, thanks entirely to the magical wheat seeds enchanted and cultivated by the hybrid elf Agno. The head of the Ministry of Agriculture was a veteran farmer who had fled the southern border to the wasteland and had been farming for 3 generations. He knew exactly how wheat should grow in the north, where the temperature difference between day and night was vastly different from the south. Both barley and wheat here typically grew in single ears, yielding around 10 kernels per sheaf, thanks to the fertile black soil of the wasteland. But in this golden sea of wheat, each stalk had 2 or 3 separate ears, and the kernels were fuller and larger than ever before, practically gleaming like sparkling golden beans. How is it going? Applying elven magic to ordinary farming yields incredible results, isn't it? Reiner plucked a wheat ear with his metal hand and said with a smile to the Ministry of Agriculture officials around him. The agricultural director sighed softly. Yes. It's a pity that no noble spellcaster has ever been willing to lower his gaze to the land and crops that we depend on for our survival. Halfway through his words, he suddenly remembered his immediate superior, Reiner, who also always considered himself a spellcaster. He quickly shut up and changed the subject. Master Steward, the weather has been sunny lately, and the wheat fields can be harvested at any time. You see, Reiner clapped his hands and said in a relaxed tone, then starting tomorrow, have the mechanical repair center complete the inspection of all agricultural alchemy beasts this afternoon, and begin harvesting the farmland immediately tomorrow morning. Then he raised a hand and pointed in the direction of the glacial river. He smiled at the endless flat wasteland on the opposite bank and said, while the harvest is underway, don't forget to open up this newly planned farmland. I have asked the Lord to grant permission to use the icebreaker. You should arrange for personnel to reach the other side as soon as possible to complete the measurement and division of the new land. A young subordinate official came over and asked hesitantly, Lord Reiner, do we really want to reclaim the land on the other side of the river? And give it to the civilians who migrated from the southern border to cultivate? But the fields are on the other side of the river. It is impossible to transport so many people with just a big ship, and there is not even a thatched hut on the other side. How will they eat and live? Reiner chuckled confidently. Don't worry, the Lord has made preparations. You will see soon that a bridge will be built across this wide and turbulent glacial river to directly connect the 2 banks. In the future, when you are not busy in farming, you will no longer have to take the risk of paddling a sampan to the other side to pick those delicious wild fruits for making jam. Ever since he met Harvey, the Lord of the Pioneer Territory, Dirt has been staying in the small building of the guest house where he was originally arranged to stay. He meditated and read all day long and stayed indoors, quietly waiting for the next task to be assigned to him. His decision to remain in the northern wastes for a long time stemmed primarily from a letter from his uncle, for Holden, delivered to him during their meeting with Harvey. Dirt was somewhat puzzled by this. Uncle For was far away in the demonic battlefield of the Evil Moon Mountains. Even using a magical messenger, it would take nearly a month for the messenger to travel the thousands of miles from west to east to the Divine Spine Mountains north of Jackdaw Ridge. However, the letter in his hand, both in terms of its authenticity and the time of delivery, appeared to have been written by Uncle For only a few days ago. He wondered what secret magical power the spellcaster Lord had used to receive the letter so quickly. The letter was brief and concise. Apart from some mundane matters known only to family members, his uncle had only one request: find a way to stay in the Pioneer Territory, study magic with Lord Harvey, and absolutely not return to St. Varen or his home in the Wizard Kingdom of Danius for any time. Uncle Phil even affectionately addressed Lord Harvey as his best friend, seemingly a long-time acquaintance. This left Dirt, who was roughly the same age, feeling awkward, unsure whether to treat the young lord with the proper etiquette expected of an elder. However, Lord Harvey seemed unconcerned with elaborate formalities and possessed a remarkably gentle demeanor, perfectly in line with Dirt's image of a reclusive, high-ranking spellcaster, operating independently of the Union and the Wizarding Kingdom. Sir Harvey, are you suggesting that I work with this commoner, to build the bridge across the river that borders the territory? Dirt's first, finally awaited assignment left him bewildered. He had never interacted much with ordinary people in his life. Aside from the family's hired servants and grooms, those without extraordinary abilities were like weeds growing by the roadside, constant sight, yet unworthy of his attention. Harry, the head of the construction department who was summoned into the Lord's castle, was also a little confused. My lord, are you going to build a floating bridge on the glacier river like the one at the valley outpost? Harry dealt with spellcasters like Reiner, Asdalin, and Egno all day long, so he didn't feel afraid at all. Even when Harvey nodded for them to sit down, he sat down on the sofa next to Dirt, causing the young spellcaster to frown slightly. Excuse me, sir, but the glacial river is a full 70 or 80 meters wide, and the water is extremely turbulent. If it were a floating bridge, it might be passable for a short time, but after the spring thaw, it would soon be washed away. Harvey smiled and pressed the blueprint spread out on the desk, and said softly, when did I say that we were going to build a floating bridge? The reason I arranged for a spellcaster to work with you this time is because I want to build a permanent bridge made of reinforced concrete. After he said that, he ignored Harry's shocked expression, turned to Dirt and smiled. I heard from Mr. Fair that the magic faction you are good at is a combination of force field casting and earth element magic, right? Chapter 254, Mortal Wisdom. Harry, the construction minister of the frontier territory, and the young spellcaster Dirt stood side by side on a small, makeshift pier on the banks of the ice river. According to the Lord's blueprints and construction requirements, this bridge requires at least 3 or 4 spans. But the ice river flows so swiftly that even if I quarried enough stone from the mountains to form the piers, it would be quickly washed away by the ice-laden water. This bridge is far more difficult than building a wizard's tower for you, Lord. After receiving this daunting construction task, Harry immediately visited Arstalin and obtained a large amount of bridge construction drawings and materials from the territory's chief advisor. He then devoted himself to theoretical study day and night, which impressed Dirt, who had always looked down on mortals. The young spellcaster put away his initial disdain and reminded quietly, don't forget, Lord Harvey has a hard requirement for this bridge. The entire bridge must be 6 meters above the water surface, so that the magical steel sailless ship can pass smoothly. This is probably the main reason why he sent me to assist you. Harry came back to his senses and asked cautiously, in the Lord's study that day, I really didn't understand. How exactly did the Lord want you to assist me? Can the spellcaster's magic really create a bridge out of thin air on the river? The Minister of Construction was accustomed to seeing some of the spells performed by his superior Reiner and Chief Asdalin, but most of them were performed by instruments and accessories installed on their alchemical bodies, similar to the ultra-high temperature energy beam welding gun that Reiner often used. Dirt suppressed the rant that was about to burst forth, patiently explaining, since we're building a bridge so high off the river, we naturally need to build gentle slopes connecting both banks. This is a monumental undertaking for ordinary people like you. Just quarrying and transporting the stone will keep you busy for a while. He raised his hand with a hint of smugness, pointed to the planned bridge site before him, knelt down, gently pressed his palms to the ground, and began to silently chant a lengthy incantation. Harry immediately felt the ground beneath his feet begin to tremble slightly, as if something was surging and churning deep underground, startling the wild waterfowl on the riverbank and scattering in all directions. What kind of magic are you using? You're actually causing an earthquake. Dirt ignored Harry's questioning. The spell he was currently casting was called Dirt's Mud and Rock Rising, a modified fourth circle earth elemental magic he had personally created. Incorporating the matrix structure and spell inscriptions of force field spells, the resulting effect also resulted in a certain amount of topographical change. Under his spell, the soft, damp mud on the riverbank suddenly boiled and coalesced, quickly rising from the ground to form a gently sloping hill. Then, as if being fiercely kneaded and shaped by invisible giant hands, the mud gradually shifted and solidified, transforming into the familiar, ordinary rock. Harry screamed and ran over, and within a few minutes he suddenly appeared on the hillock by the river and started digging, muttering in disbelief, Oh my god. You turned this oil into hard stone. This is simply incredible, Dirt hummed with satisfaction. And with trembling hands he quietly took out an elemental magic stone from the pocket on his waist and held it in his hand. He was just a research-type mid-level spellcaster, and if he didn't want to show off in front of this mortal, it would not be a simple and easy task to cast this kind of range-type spell that almost exhausted the magic power in his body. Harry was quick-witted and quickly came up with an idea to apply what he had learned. He said excitedly, "Mr. Dirt. I know what the Lord means. As long as I get a boat to bring you to the surface of the river, can't I use your magical spell to lift the solid rock piers directly from the riverbed? Ha ha ha." In this way, the bridge can be completed in less than half a month. Dirt couldn't help rolling his eyes. He snatched the stack of bridge drawings from Haru's hand, pointed his finger and asked palely, "Without touching this oil at the bottom of the river, I can't turn this rotten silt into rock. At most, I can lift them from the riverbed to expose them to the surface of the river, but the turbulent water will continue to carry away the mud and sand. This kind of bridge piers can't last for more than a few days." It wasn't that Dirt was deliberately refusing to cooperate with Haru. Even a high-level elemental spellcaster wouldn't be able to solidify the soft mud and sand at the riverbed into rock simply by transmitting magical energy through the water surface without direct contact with a target. After all, this involved the transmission of magical energy, something a mere construction official couldn't explain. He sighed, put away the elemental magic stone, which had been depleted of its magical power, and said calmly, "Just arrange for your personnel to mine the stone at the foot of Jackdaw Ridge, transport it back, and then find a way to tie it up with chains and throw it into the water. I can only cooperate with you by raising the gentle slopes on both sides." Haru, undeterred, summoned his technical officers to gather around Haru's sketch of the bridge and began discussing it on the spot. Dirt stood quietly by, observing with a cold eye. While mortal spellcasters often harbor delusions in their pursuit of truth, ordinary people are more prone to unrealistic ideas, often driven by the desire for shortcuts. The heated discussion didn't last long. Haru suddenly clapped his hands and excitedly walked over to Dirt. "Mr. Dirt, I've got an idea. While the mud you've lifted from the riverbed won't withstand the erosion of the water, if it can hold for 2 or 3 days, that's enough time for us to drive piles through it, pour concrete underneath, and insert rebar to stabilize it." As he spoke, he grabbed a piece of white paper and, without a trace of pretense, squatted down and began sketching, prompting Dirt to squat down and watch. "Look, if I drive a hollow iron rod through the middle, I can continuously pour concrete deeper. If the piles are driven deep enough, we can even embed rebar directly into the rock of the riverbed." Furthermore, since Dirt could control the rise of the mud, he could also reverse it and sink it. Thus, these hollow iron pipes encased in mud, along with the solidified concrete and rebar inside, could be carried underground along with them. "That idea is quite ingenious." Dirt's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but praise them. "So the question now is, can this soft river mud I've lifted hold up until you drive the iron piles and complete the concrete pour?" An officer, temporarily seconded to the shipyard and experienced in the construction of steel icebreakers, came up and suggested, "Why not have the spellcaster, while lifting the riverbed mud, use his magic to shape it into a boat, just as he did just now? That way, even in strong currents, it can cut through the current like a ship, preventing it from being carried away by a large amount of mud." Dirt was startled, glancing sideways at the swarthy young official, a touch of shock in his heart. These ordinary people, completely devoid of spellcasting talent, had, in this northern wasteland, possessed the same keen observation and thinking skills as spellcasters. This was simply impossible for the toiling masses of the southern border, who toiled day and night for their livelihoods. Chapter 255 Harvest Festival. The first crop of magic wheat sown in late spring in the northern frontier territory finally reached its harvest in mid-autumn. Hundreds of farmers with official employment contracts followed the giant agricultural alchemy beasts through the wheat fields, continuously filing pre-prepared sacks with a golden grain spewing from their bellies. The improved agricultural alchemy beasts were now capable of simultaneously harvesting and threshing the wheat, eliminating the need for manual collection and transfer to the threshing floor for threshing, saving considerable manpower and time. However, cleaning, sorting, and drying were still essential steps. Once bagged, the wheat was quickly transported to a drying yard adjacent to the farm, where it was turned and dried. This was where the temporary laborers came in handy. They used shovels and rakes to toss the grains, like stir-frying vegetables, sweeping away the straw and debris mixed in with the grains, leaving only the plump, golden grains. The remaining straw after the alchemical beasts had ripped the wheat grains apart actually had many uses. It could be used to fertilize the fields and as bedding for livestock. Even the refugee shanties had roofs made of straw. But Harvey didn't have the time to develop these specialized crop industries at the moment. He simply followed a standard approach, watching as farmers gathered the straw in piles in the fields and burned it. This resulted in a gray haze shrouding the entire territory for over a week during the wheat harvest, making the air quality extremely poor. Harvey only managed to visit the farm once, but was so embarrassed by the smoke and sun exposure that he decided to let Reiner and the city officials handle the matter themselves. A threshing ground for drying the wheat was built next to the fields. Temporary workers piled the dried wheat grains into small golden mounds, which were then handed over to the storage area for bagging and weighing. "Sir, this year's wheat is a bumper harvest." Reiner led the head of the Ministry of Agriculture and ran excitedly into Harvey's study. "After preliminary weighing and statistics, the yield per mu of our farmland has more than doubled compared to last year. The wheat grains produced by the enchanted wheat seeds are fuller and larger than normal." "Not bad." Harvey couldn't help laughing, and said with satisfaction, "It seems that you asked me to clear out some of the warehouses of old wheat some time ago because you predicted the bumper harvest this autumn." Reiner's tone was a little excited. "We only recruited less than 1,000 farmers, and with the cooperation of those large agricultural alchemical beasts, we grew enough food to feed 10,000 people. This is impossible in the fiefdom of any noble lord in the southern border." Harvey had a deep understanding of this problem. As a person who had traveled through time and space and lived for more than 10 years, although he used to be a small landlord family that did not engage in production, he still had a certain understanding of the development of human agriculture during this period. 60 pounds of wheat seeds sown in a field would often yield only 5 times the grain yield, or less than 300 pounds of wheat. Furthermore, without intensive farming techniques and relying solely on the most primitive shifting cultivation methods, most farmers, except in the extremely fertile southern coastal areas, could only harvest 5 for every one they planted. This meant that even an average freeholder of that era, with only 30 acres of land, could only feed a meager family of 5, with a surplus still needed to pay taxes to the lord. In the event of sudden tax increases or war recruitment, the entire family would likely face winter hunger. The population of cities during this era was often hindered by the low grain yields of surrounding towns and farms. Even cities like Jinhu City, with a population of over 30,000, were considered large, while Harvey's isolated frontier territory in the northern wilderness could accommodate a population of 10,000, a true miracle. This is where productivity constraints stem from. If the mechanized agricultural technology brought by the alchemy beasts could be fully popularized, not only would farmers in a pioneering territory be able to support 10 civilians, as they currently do, but feeding hundreds or even thousands of people would be a breeze. Therefore, it's essential to develop mechanized farming techniques and continuously improve the catalytic magic wheat seeds and other food crop seeds. This way, we can feed more people with as little labor as possible, freeing workers from the land and redirecting them to industrial production within our own territory. The next afternoon, Harvey, flanked by his personal guards, ascended the makeshift wooden platform erected in the civic square in front of the castle. A large crowd had already gathered, separated by rows of black uniformed territorial defense troops. The scene was bustling with activity. 3 resounding hums from the alchemy microphone quickly hushed the crowd. Harvey cleared his throat, stepped beside the microphone, and began his speech. Today marks the first harvest festival in the frontier territory, as well as the territory's first medal awarding ceremony. Those who have made significant contributions to our northern homeland this year deserve my commendation today, and they too deserve the public's cheers. After his concise speech, the crowd erupted in deafening cheers and applause. Reiner then stepped forward, picked up a pre-prepared list of medals and awards, and began reading them out one by one. Pierce, chief commander of the territorial army, fought against the remnants of the demonic forces that were invading the territory, and traveled south to Jackdaw Town to receive and transport refugees. Egener, director of the Territorial Medical Center, improved wheat seeds and developed potions and vaccines to treat the plague. Chris, director of the Alchemy Laboratory, developed potions and vaccines to treat the plague. Haru, director of the Construction Department, and the director of the Agriculture Department. Vaughn, commander of the 1st Battalion of the Northern Army, and commander of the 1st Battalion of the Defense Force, Harvey chose these individuals for the first award ceremony, primarily to set an example for the people to emulate. Among them were spellcasters, hybrid elves, vampires, ordinary wastelanders, refugees from the southern border, and orcs. None of them were born into a distinguished family or possessed exceptional bloodlines. They had all risen from the bottom step by step to their current position. This meant that the Lord wasn't nepotistic, but rather valued merit and ability over lineage. Amid the cheers and whistles of the Northern Army soldiers, Vaughn once again accepted an exquisite black iron medal from the Lord. Rubbing his hands together, he watched excitedly as the Lord personally pinned it on his chest, then happily withdrew. Glancing around, he noticed that Construction Minister Haru, standing beside him, already wore 2 black iron medals, one with a relief of the territory's walls, the other with a silhouette of a towering building and bridge. These were likely in recognition of his recent achievements in building the Icefield River Bridge and the territory's apartment complex. Vaughn couldn't help but curl his lips, looking away with a hint of envy. He naturally had more medals than Haru. He never missed the twice-yearly military shooting competitions, always taking home a brass medal representing a sharpshooter. But the value of the black iron medal was clearly not as great, as it was only highly sought after and popular within the military. After Pierce, Igno, and the others accepted the Lord's commendation and retreated, Vaughn's eyes were filled with envy. The medals they wore on their chests were silver, black iron, silver, gold. 3 different materials and emblems, clearly representing the importance and merit of their contributions to the territory. Chapter 256, Natural Treasure House of the Wasteland. Igno, who worked at the Territory Medical Center, had recently extorted a generous sum of research funding from Harvey. He then happily set off on a speeding magic scooter with his research partner, Chris, and 100 Northern Army soldiers loaned from Commander Pierce. The main purpose of this outing was Igno's proposed replenishing sampling of magical plants for the territory's potion plantation. The plantation had been operating for over 6 months, and in addition to introducing a large number of common potion plants from the south, newly discovered magical plants from the surrounding area had also been incorporated into the plantation after their medicinal properties and practical applications were determined through experiments. After the harvest festival, Harvey took time out to have Igno accompany him on an inspection of the plantation. He concluded that the plantation's current variety of magical plants was too limited. Besides the extensive cultivation of the versatile rubber fruit, only a few species, such as winter frost flower, hawkwood, human-faced grass, and doghead thorn potato, had achieved widespread cultivation. These are the raw materials needed for the territory's medical center to mass-produce magical vaccines. These magical plants can only be cultivated in the unique temperature and soil conditions of the northern wastes. This is why Harvey insists on only exporting finished plague potions to the Federation, rather than directly selling the formula. The ingredients for the potions are unavailable in the Southern Territory, they are only available in his own area, in the northern wastes. Considering the previously discovered magical creature, the snakehead leech, a unique Northland creature, which has played a crucial role in the territory's medical development, even the now commonly available civilian medical alchemy beasts are derived from the souls of these disgustingly slippery giant leeches. Harvey believes that regular outings to collect samples are essential. The vast wasteland north of the Sacred Spine Mountains is essentially a vast natural treasure trove, a place where human life is difficult to establish. And Igno and Chris did not disappoint Harvey. Despite spending nearly 2 weeks out there, they brought back an exceptionally rich harvest. In addition to some edible non-magical wild crops, there were 3 newly discovered magical plants that particularly intrigued Harvey. These common wild fruit and vegetable samples can simply be catalyzed with magical energy and handed over to the Ministry of Agriculture for cultivation and research. Whether they can be mass-produced or cultivated remains to be seen, Igno reported to Harvey, holding a thick stack of sample lists. One of the plants, still unnamed but seemingly sturdy, reed-like plants, was discovered by the sampling team near a dried-up salt lake over 200 miles away. Harvey was amazed to discover that a rich, salty juice could be extracted from its thick stems. Isn't this just super salty sugarcane? There are no natural well salt deposits near Harvey's frontier territory. The people's daily needs are largely imported from the southern border at a high price. The Dragonstone Chamber of Commerce owns several large sea salt mines in the Thousand Sails Kingdom of Pharaohs. While the salt must be transported a long way, the price is relatively reasonable. Since the outbreak of the plague in St. Varen, the Dragonstone Merchant Guild has requested a temporary suspension of trade, waiting for the epidemic to subside before resuming bulk cargo deliveries. Luxury goods like sugar, wine, silk, and tobacco remain relatively unaffected, but salt, a vital commodity, would be severely impacted if its supply remained unsupplied for an extended period. Reiner considered using chem-camels to transport brine crystals from a natural saline alkali deposit far outside the territory. However, the distance and lead time required, coupled with the need to constantly guard against attacks from the surrounding fell orc tribes, meant both mining and production efficiency were extremely low. Furthermore, the people of the territory, accustomed to find sea salt, were generally well off and willing to pay a premium for the already scarce sea salt, disdaining the slightly bitter natural mineral salt. It's easy to go from simple to luxurious, but difficult to go back to simple. Are you sure this salty sugarcane can really be squeezed out of a large amount of salt-rich slurry, and can be purified into a large amount of pure salt crystals? Harvey pinched a small piece of plant stem, a little unsure. Although he had seen spherical olives that could be pressed for oil and knew about the sweet wild fruits that could be extracted from rubber, this was the first time he had seen a plant producing salt. My lord, it is absolutely true. We have repeatedly verified that this thick reed plant, although the magic power contained within it is extremely weak, can be squeezed out of a rich salt juice. It is safe, non-toxic, and pure, Egno replied firmly. Chris came over and agreed. Besides, they are extremely easy to plant. You just need to cut off a part of the stem and stick it into the soil casually. It will take root and sprout soon. It will grow a lot taller in 3 to 5 days. It is not picky about the soil and can be planted even in sandy riverbeds. Harvey nodded and ordered, then let the Ministry of Agriculture allocate a piece of sandy riverbed and use it as an experimental field to plant a batch of them. We will see the yield and then make plans. After that, he turned his head to look at the several strange plants that were carefully placed on the laboratory table and isolated with glass covers, and asked, in addition to ordinary wild crop plants, I heard that you have also discovered several very strange magical plants. Egno and Chris immediately became excited. The two of them held Harvey to the side of the laboratory table and began to introduce it enthusiastically. This was the most important gain of their sampling this time, except for the salty sugar cane. Chris carefully picked up a crystal clear, bean-shaped wild fruit with his metal arm and explained joyfully, this is a magical fruit never before discovered in alchemy. It has a unique property, the juice extracted from it can change color at will, from the azure blue of the sky to the dark green of the forest, even the brown and black of the soil. My lord, we've discovered a brand new magical dye. Harvey watched as Chris crushed the fruit in his hand. The transparent juice coated his originally silver-white metal palm, but the stained area immediately changed in the sunlight. As he brought his palm close to a piece of deep black fabric, it quickly changed to the same color. Harvey's mind flashed with a term for equipment often seen in modern war games in his past life, optical camouflage. This wasn't a magical dye at all. No, it wasn't just for dyeing textiles, but was more suitable for military use, whether it was camouflage uniforms for soldiers or concealed coatings for weapons and military vehicles. How long does this dyeing and color-changing effect last? Is it permanent? Harvey asked impatiently. Egno had already prepared the answer and smiled. It's similar to the properties of rubber fruit. If it's not soaked in strong salt water to bleach, it can almost maintain this color change indefinitely. We tried it by staining an ordinary cotton coat and then had a soldier wear it in the woods. The result was that it perfectly simulated the various mottled colors of tree trunks, soil, and bushes. Even though the soldier was only a few dozen meters away from us, he looked invisible and difficult to detect. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257 Magic Version of Optical Camouflage. Harvey's mind was filled with only one thought, thank God for nature's gift. He'd unexpectedly discovered an alternative to the optical camouflage coating technology he'd known in his previous life, which required the application of nanotechnology. This unique property, naturally evolved from a tiny magical herb, spoke volumes. In this world of transcendental powers and magical elements, there were still countless undiscovered wonders worth exploring. Submit to me a detailed report on the growth environment, planting requirements, and catalytic output of this magical plant as soon as possible, Harvey said hurriedly. If it can be widely used in the Army's standard equipment, we will most likely have a powerful assault force that can be invisible directly in the wilderness. Chris and Egno instantly understood what Harvey meant and changed their minds. Sir, you mean that this thing can not only be used to dye some exquisite fabrics that can change color, but should be used in the soldiers' combat uniforms and equipment, so that they can perfectly integrate into the wild battlefield and achieve super concealment effect? The two of them took a breath together. In this regard, they are really not as open-minded as the Lord, and their ideas are bold and imaginative. Sir, please lie face down in the mud for 10 minutes, alright, please lower yourself again, aligning yourself completely with this bush, please completely submerge your head above the water. We'll provide you with a metal tube to ensure underwater breathing. Could you please bury yourself as much as possible in this cotton? It's not snowing yet, so we can't verify the color-changing effect in snow, so we'll have to use cotton instead. Vaughn, expressionless, clad in a strangely ill-fitting cotton coat, mechanically followed the instructions of an alchemy lab apprentice, repeatedly rolling and tumbling among various objects, sometimes staying prone for a while, or curling up to hide within them. These alchemy apprentices, whose fur had barely grown out, paid no attention to his position as a Northern Army battalion commander and repeatedly asked him to perform various antics, even asking him to try lying on the back of a foul-smelling, long-haired wild boar to see if he could blend in with the boar's deep black fur. If it weren't for Lord Harvey watching from afar, he would have responded with an impatient scowl. My lord, the preliminary color-changing experiment results are in. Harvey took the stack of lab reports Chris handed him and quickly flipped through them while listening to his report. The dye, temporarily named illusion fruit, could only work when applied to inanimate surfaces to create its magical color-changing camouflage effect. It had no effect on humans or animals. Furthermore, the dye's color-changing effect was most pronounced on metal and fabric, with far less success on leather, wood, or rubber. The dye changes color most quickly and accurately when simulating solid-colored objects like dirt, rock, and grass. Soldiers wearing this camouflage uniform only need to stay close to these objects for tens of seconds to quickly change color, achieving excellent concealment. Chris's report was meticulous, detailing the dye's reaction time down to the second. However, in more complex simulated environments, the color change reaction was somewhat slow and inconsistent, and was virtually ineffective in water, dispelling Harvey's hopes of achieving near-transparent stealth. In modeled flower beds and indoor environments, the color change took a prolonged period of nearly half an hour to occur, and the simulated colors had a very poor fit, completely failing to blend in with the surroundings. Harvey quickly grasped the core properties of the illusion fruit dye. The purer the surrounding color, the faster and more effective the simulation, while the purer the color, the worse it was. This meant that this camouflage paint was best suited for military uniforms, weapons, and vehicles. This would provide optimal concealment, whether operating in dense forests, grasslands, or snowy terrain. He waved his hand and called the dusty battalion commander Vaughn to his front, and asked in a gentle voice, "How comfortable are the clothes made of this color-changing dye to wear? Is there any discomfort in the part that comes into contact with the skin?" Vaughn scratched his head and answered honestly, "My lord, it is definitely worse than the standard military uniforms we wear on weekdays. It feels a bit too rough, and it is slightly painful when it rubs against the skin. But such magical color-changing clothes are of great help to our raids. There is no need to worry about a little discomfort. Just issue some ointments to the soldiers to apply on the damaged skin." Harvey smiled and shook his head, and earnestly educated his veteran who was famous for his hard work and perseverance. "I am not denying the toughness of the soldiers, but if they go out to fight for a long time, even minor skin injuries are likely to cause some serious physical infections, so this problem must be solved." He had heard many real war stories in his previous life, such as the leather boots issued by the army due to design problems, which caused soldiers to suffer from trench foot, and eventually led to ischemic necrosis and amputation due to non-war casualties. There were also the German popsicles, where misjudging the weather led to massive casualties from hypothermia. The Typhoon Operation, the German blitzkrieg against the Soviet Union during World War II, resulted in widespread freezing and frostbite deaths in Moscow. First, try adding a soft cotton lining inside the camouflage uniforms to see if that alleviates the friction, Harvey instructed the munitions factory supervisor. If that doesn't work, add a few more layers, or find soft leather as a substitute. Ensure both breathability and insulation. Without skimping on cost, Chris interjected, "Sir, don't worry too much about the coating on weapons and alchemical vehicles. Once Egno has transplanted and catalyzed these plants in large quantities, I can immediately begin equipping the army with camouflage weapons." Harvey nodded, urging them to proceed as quickly as possible. The winter of the new year is approaching, and the day when the evil orcs will invade the south is not far away. Among the magic plants you brought back before, there is still one that you haven't submitted the experimental test report to me. Is there any problem or difficulty? Egno shook his head with a wry smile and explained, "My lord, it's not that I encountered any technical difficulties. We don't know what to use that thing as yet. I brought it back reluctantly only because it is indeed a magic plant that has never been discovered, so we use it to enrich the magic plant category of the plantation." Harvey asked curiously, "Oh? You haven't found its use yet? What kind of weird magic plant is it?" Chapter 258, The Blood Recognition ID Card. Egno picked up a silver leaf and handed it to Harvey with a wry smile. "Look, my lord," he said, smiling, "this is the magical plant we brought back, a completely useless one." Harvey took it curiously, noting that the leaf resembled a mulberry leaf, but its color was a bright silver like tinfoil. The thin leaf felt smooth in his hand, its texture truly unique. "This plant has never been discovered or recorded in any alchemical texts," Chris explained with some resignation. "But I suspect it's not a completely new magical plant, but rather, it's so useless, lacking any medicinal properties, that even if it were discovered, no one would bother to record it." "Oh? No medicinal properties? Then how does the magical substance it contains manifest itself? How did you discover its existence? Is it simply because its silvery white appearance is so conspicuous?" Harvey pressed on. Egno casually picked up a leaf from the collection box, then took out a metal lancet and gently pricked his fingertip. He squeezed out a drop of blood and smeared it onto the leaf. Moments later, the silver leaf emitted a faint, shimmering white light. "Luminescence? That's its magical property? Strange, but haven't you considered using it as a replacement for the illuminating stone?" Harvey felt that the luminescence property wasn't completely useless. Whether it was used as a lighting substitute or to extract fluorescent ingredients, it had practical value. Egno chuckled bitterly again and placed the leaf on the table. Harvey noticed that the leaf immediately lost all its light, returning to a dull silver color. "Sir, this is its uselessness. To make it emit a faint glow, the person who touches it must smear their own blood on it. But it seems to have some kind of memory. From then on, it will only glow when touched by the specific target, the owner of the blood. Once contact is released, the glow dissipates immediately." Harvey immediately understood what Egno described, some strange blood recognition property. Chris followed Egno's instructions, pricking his fingertip to squeeze out a drop of blood and smearing it on a new leaf. The silver leaf's reaction was exactly the same, it only glowed faintly when Chris touched it, and once it left his hand, the light immediately faded, returning to its original, ordinary appearance. A leaf can only record the information of a person's blood, and from then on, it will only glow when touched by that target. After discovering this property, we completely abandoned the idea of using it to replace the illuminating stone. Chris was a little depressed. Discovering a new magical plant was supposed to be a great surprise, but after so much tedious experimentation, this result was truly disappointing. Egno muttered, "That's even worse than those sturdy reeds that grow in saline soils and can extract concentrated brine. At least they can add immense value to the territory." Harvey rubbed his chin, pondering for a moment before a strange idea struck him. Since this plant possessed the seemingly useless memory ability of blood recognition, if it were applied to the administrative tasks of population counting and identity registration, wouldn't it be possible to create a near-perfect, inimitable identity authentication system? Over a year ago, when Harvey began taking in large numbers of refugees from the wastelands and southern borders, he had already been grappling with the issue of population registration. In this magical world, where supernatural powers coexisted with feudal rule, there simply wasn't a robust and comprehensive method for counting populations. Most nobles and fiefdom lords relied on their own legions of tax collectors to collect taxes by counting the number of households in their territories. During the census, only a rough estimate of household population, farmland area, livestock, and oxen was recorded. At most, the occupation of the primary labor force in each household would be noted, allowing the lord to more accurately select labor quotas. However, this entire census process could not fully verify personal information, relying solely on the collector's memory. Once population movements occurred due to migration or war recruitment, these residents immediately became undocumented, their true identities impossible to verify. Harvey himself witnessed numerous instances in his childhood where migrants, once free farmers, were ultimately hanged as tax evaders due to uncertainty about their identities. Harvey first noticed this problem during the period of rapid population growth in his territory. When registering a refugee, city officials would rely solely on verbal questioning to gather information about their past employment history. They would then be issued a simple ID card simply recording their age, height, occupation, and place of origin. As a result, a surge in crimes involving stolen IDs and fraudulently obtaining wages using someone else's name emerged. This situation only eased after Harvey established more comprehensive territorial laws, imposing harsher penalties such as forced labor. The territorial police department often faced the tedious task of conducting field visits and gathering evidence during routine patrols and investigations due to the difficulty in completely matching identity information with the offender. With this unique plant, which possesses blood memory, simply attaching it to a new ID document will create personal information that is absolutely impossible to forge. This will significantly reduce the workload for City Hall's demographic staff and provide a clearer picture of the territory's current population structure. Harvey enthusiastically explained to Egno and Chris the significance of this new magical plant and immediately drew a new ID design on paper. Use printing technology to mass-produce these ID cards, adding a waterproof rubber fruit coating to the surface to prevent them from breaking and soaking, thus achieving a durable effect. Egno immediately catalyzed a batch of these magical plants. The southern refugees were about to release into the frontier territory will be perfect for them. With this magical leafy plant in hand, Harvey had more ideas for territory administration. For example, the Territory Bank, located next to the City Hall, had previously served a rather useless purpose. It simply facilitated residents' mortgage applications and the exchange of gold and dollar banknotes for metal coins. However, no one was willing to go there to exchange coins, as coins were not widely circulated in the territory, and the residents, already settled in content, had no desire to leave their increasingly prosperous new home. With a magical ID card, the once deserted Territory Bank would become a much more useful place. At least residents no longer had to hide their saved salaries at home. Instead, they could save them and withdraw them with their ID cards when they needed to make a large expenditure. This way, the bank could truly fulfill Harvey's envisioned role in regulating the territory's currency circulation and commercial activities. From now on, the payment of salaries for all positions in the territory can be handled by the banking department. Chapter 259 Population Census and Identity Registration. At the refugee shelters outside the eastern walls of the Pioneer Territory, thousands of plague refugees from the southern border, guided by defense soldiers and police officers, lined up for a highly specialized registration process. Orange Pie, the deputy steward of the City Hall and one of the first refugees to be recruited by the Lord, was well aware of the invaluable wealth of this hard-won labor force. To cure their plague and bring them back to the northern territories, the Lord had expended enormous sums of money and manpower, even dispatching the strongest soldiers of the Northern Army to the south of the mountains, risking the risk of intruding into other noble territories, to bring them back safely. For nearly a month, the costs of military subsidies for over 1,000 soldiers on missions, overtime pay at the territorial hospital, maintenance and repair costs for the war beasts and alchemic camels used to transport the refugees, and fuel consumption for magical vehicles like the magic cards, they were so painful that Orange Pie couldn't sleep at night. Not to mention the free food, medicine, and warm clothing provided to the nearly 5,000 refugees sheltered in the shanties along the city walls, along with the generous salaries offered to them for their services in building new residential areas within the territory. If it weren't for the impending harvest season, which saw the territory harvest several times more grain than in previous years, and the lucrative export revenue from plague potions at the beginning of the month, the City Hall's monthly financial statements would have been in the red. After all, while the gold and silver notes circulating within the territory were printed, the purchase of imported supplies required actual cash payments. The two were inherently interdependent, and gold and silver coins served as the foundation of the territory's economic system. After the refugees were repatriated, to prevent the resurgence of the epidemic and its spread within the territory, the Lord decided to establish a temporary shelter outside the city to allow them to acclimate and quarantine for a period of time. Once the new housing was completed, they would be moved into the city in batches. The tedious and arduous task of registering refugees entering the city naturally fell to the city hall, more precisely, to Changpi, who was in charge of population management. He mobilized nearly all of his dozens of officials and apprentices, directing the construction department to erect wooden sheds and grills at the eastern gates of the city wall. This allowed them to categorize and count the incoming refugees and enter their identities into their files. 5 corridors were established for registration and inspection, each with a simple wooden shed at the end, staffed by several city hall officials responsible for registration and issuing identification documents. Name, age, where's your hometown, what was your previous occupation? I mean, what did you do in the past? A farmer or a craftsman, are you alone or have a family? How many people are there in your family? Do you have any family members left in your hometown? The official in charge of registration repeated the questions in an orderly manner. Outside the shed, soldiers kept shouting with loudspeakers, "Identity registration is required to enter the city." No one is allowed to conceal or deceive the officials in charge of registration. If any false information is verified, they will be immediately deported or sentenced to labor in the mines. I am a gardener. A middle-aged man with gray hair walked cautiously to the registration office. I can't do anything except tending flowers and plants. Does the Lord need someone like me? Please don't send me back to the southern border. My family died of the plague. The refugees queuing up to register and waiting to enter the city have been whispering in private. It seems that the Lord of the Wasteland prefers farmers who engage in planting and craftsmen who can make weapons for him. Any refugees who reported these 2 occupations were taken away from the registration point first and sent directly into the city. Gardner, the young city hall official, looked up, stunned. In the ID box beside him, various compartments held thick stacks of blank ID cards, none of which had yet to be blood registered. The compartments listed over a dozen occupations, including farmer, blacksmith, carpenter, stonemason, miner, weaver, physician, and coachman, but not even gardener. After all, this was a job reserved for the estates and gardens of noble lords, a rare sight in the northern wilderness. Orange Peel, who was patrolling back and forth, immediately noticed the problem here and came over to ask, "What's your name? Can you read?" The middle-aged man paused, rubbed his hands awkwardly and said, "Your Excellency. My name is Neil. I can read, but not much." Orange Peel nodded and pulled out a blank ID card without any occupation marked on it. "It's okay as long as you can read. Come, stretch out your hand." He quickly used a repeatedly disinfected metal probe to take a drop of blood and smeared it on the blank ID card. The middle-aged man was surprised to find that the palm-sized piece of paper immediately emitted a faint white light. Orange Peel handed the ID card to the man and, turning to the soldier standing by, instructed, "Specialized professional talent, literate. Send him to Lord Egno's Territory Hospital. He might be able to get a job at the potion plantation." "Okay." Next, several young apprentices following Orange Peel couldn't help but whisper, "Teacher, what if they fabricate an identity and sneak into the city to swindle jobs and housing benefits?" Orange Peel chuckled, pulling out an ID card with his own name on it and waving it in his hand. "Each of you has replaced this new ID card. You should know that it not only records your name, age, and occupation, but also your address and serial number. And it only glows when you hold it in your hand. Even if someone managed to trick the staff during registration and actually entered the city with their ID card and secured a permanent position, their lack of actual work experience would quickly expose them. The police would then rush to their home based on the address on their ID and arrest them. At that time, these people will be sent directly to the mines to serve 3 to 5 years of forced labor in accordance with the laws of the territory. This kind of free labor, unpaid, will make the mine supervisor so eager to see more of them that he'll probably wake up laughing in his dreams. Furthermore, ID cards will be required for everything from purchasing housing, collecting work salaries, and enjoying holiday benefits. They're completely impossible to impersonate or forge. Even wandering the streets at night might lead to a surprise inspection by patrolling police officers. If you can't produce a luminous ID to prove your identity, you'll be immediately shackled and taken away. Orange Peel couldn't help but sigh softly to the apprentices he was personally teaching. The invention and application of this ID card has provided incredible convenience and benefits to our city hall's work. Believe me, you'll be deeply impressed in your future work. Chapter 261 Day Tour Guide. On his day off, Uriel woke up early, quickly washed up, and prepared to go out. Father Colin popped his head out of the kitchen and called out to him, "Little Uriel. Why are you leaving so early on your day off? Stay and have breakfast with me before you go." Uriel froze for a moment, then turned and walked into the kitchen, which was warmed by the stove. His robotic arm nimbly picked up a buttered pancake from the steaming pot on the stovetop and carelessly stuffed it into his mouth, chewing it. Dad, your cooking skills are really getting better and better. Why don't you just quit teaching at the school and apply for the chef position at one of the convenience restaurants in the market district?" Father Colin laughed heartily at the slightly exaggerated compliment, and couldn't help but gently tap Uriel's brassy prosthetic leg with his spatula. "Speaking of which, you're out on vacation, and in uniform. Does the Lord have another mission for you?" Uriel nodded and said simply, "A guest from Jackdaw Town is invited to the territory today, and the Lord has personally appointed me to greet and accompany him, as a guide." Eye of Illusion King Gavin squinted as he emerged from the massive war beast. Riding this magical alchemical vehicle for the first time was a thrilling experience. When he received the invitation, he had originally planned to use his flight technique to reach directly over Jackdaw Ridge, but he ultimately underestimated the height of the Divine Spine Mountains and the temperature of the border wasteland. Forget flying directly across the towering snow-capped mountains. As a high-level spellcaster, his own magical reserves wouldn't even be enough to sustain him to reach the frontier territory. Traveling alone to an unknown spellcaster territory with nearly depleted mana wasn't a wise choice. Riding this strange alchemical carriage was clearly a better option. Though it traversed a rugged mountain forest, it was remarkably smooth and swift. Setting off at midnight yesterday, it took only half a day, arriving at their destination just as the sun rose the next day. As soon as he dismounted the warbeast, a familiar figure approached, extending its nimble and powerful mechanical prosthetic leg to shake his hand. "Welcome to the Northern Frontier Territory. Mr. Eye of Illusion, I'm the Lord's designated guide and host. Do you remember me?" Uriel said with a polite smile. The Eye of Illusion nodded, smiling back. "Mr. Uriel, of course I remember. I'd say I'm quite impressed." He then pointed at the other's metallically gleaming mechanical prosthesis and winked teasingly. Uriel, unfazed by the reserved banter between spellcasters, said seriously, "War beasts aren't allowed in the city, they damage the smooth roads. So, we can just walk to the Lord's castle. I'd also like to see the territory along the way." The Eye of Illusion, without the airs of a distinguished guest, casually strode into the city. Uriel quickly caught up, walking alongside him. The young, high-level spellcaster quickly understood what he meant by smooth roads. The streets throughout the territory were remarkably flat and spacious, with not a single pothole or muddy spot, let alone the usual stagnant water. The road surface seemed to be paved with gray cobblestones common on riverbanks, the gaps filled with mud, but without a trace of dust or debris, creating a smooth, even surface, as if cast and solidified. Even more surprising was that this road wasn't the only one leading to the Lord's castle. Every few hundred meters, a neatly crisscrossed intersection appeared, like a checkerboard grid drawn with a knife and a pen. These intersections were marked by prominent signposts, crafted from luxuriously forged metal. Along the way, they passed two small gardens, and the Eye of Illusion couldn't help but pause for a moment, observing the groups of children playing and laughing in the gardens, accompanied by their parents. A crisp tinkling bell rang behind him, and as he turned, he saw several young men, clearly dressed as apprentices, riding on a strange metal frame with wheels, galloping past him, laughing and smiling. The residents seemed well educated and exceptionally polite. Even an elderly man sweeping fallen leaves would pause, smile, and tip his hat in greeting. There were no small beggars gathering around with their blackened hands outstretched, no streets overflowing with sewage and filth, and even the entrance to the city gates, manned by the Lord's private soldiers, were not to be found. Is this really a pioneering territory outside the national border? The spellcaster couldn't help but sigh in surprise. I've never seen such a scene in Alair, the most prosperous magic capital in the entire continent. He politely turned sideways to Uriel and asked, "This should be Mr. Kilthuzad's family territory, right? I wonder how many generations it has taken to operate in this northern wasteland to achieve its current prosperity and wealth." Uriel was stunned for a moment, and after pondering for a moment, he slowly replied, "Not really. The pioneering territory was built about 2 years ago. It was built and managed by the Lord himself. Just like these roads under your feet, and those exquisite little gardens, they were only started and completed a year ago." He paused, subconsciously straightened the collar of his uniform, and continued, in the beginning, life here was still quite difficult. It was all thanks to the Lord who paid out of his own pocket to distribute food and build houses for the people. In the first winter, we didn't have a single case of freezing to death or starvation here. The vision I keenly noticed the unconcealed pride and elation in the other man's tone, as if he were proud to be a member of the domain, and to be honored by the vibrant and prosperous scene before him. Mr. Kilthuzad wasn't managing his own wizard family domain, but had built a vast pioneer city in the northern wastes from scratch, relying solely on a pioneering order, with a population comparable to that of a small southern kingdom's capital. How incredible! The streets were lined with dense, neatly planted trees. Sunlight filtered through the lush leaves, casting a dappled golden glow on the ground. He saw no low, dilapidated wooden shacks. The residents here all lived in square, gray stone brick houses, each 2 or 3 stories high, almost identical in style, either single-family or townhouses, clearly built by the same stonemasons. In just 2 years, Mr. Kilthuzad transformed a barren, pristine land into private domain as prosperous and flourishing as a lamb. How, exactly, had he done it without the influence and support of his family? Filled with confusion and amazement, the Eye of Illusion finally, at Urio's polite urging, reluctantly concluded its walking tour of the territory and arrived at the Lord's castle. After calmly submitting to a body search by several castle guards, it officially entered the castle. Those Lord's guards who searched me were uncontrollably radiating a rich bloodline power. They all seemed to be bloodline warriors and wizard squires trained by the Lord. Judging by the intensity of the power, it seemed they had been transformed and awakened using high-level bloodline potions. The Eye of Illusion sighed silently, finally experiencing the real feeling of visiting a spellcaster's territory, and unconsciously began to feel a little nervous. Urio pushed open the carved door to the reception room, raised his hand in a gesture of invitation, and led the Eye of Illusion inside. They soon saw the spellcaster Lord, Mr. Kilthuzad, the sole real-world representative of the Magic Network Forum, seated at the head of the long table. "Welcome to my pioneer territory," Harvey stood up and said with a smile, "Mr. Eye of Illusion." Chapter 261 Soul Transfer and Prosthetic Limb Transplantation. The Eye of Illusion felt that this spellcaster Lord, who looked even younger than himself, had certain habits that seemed slightly unnatural. For example, in what was supposed to be a formal meeting between 2 high-level spellcasters, the other party had chosen to discuss and converse over lunch. This was a rather unseemly etiquette for the Eye of Illusion, who came from an ancient wizard family. "So, Mr. Eye of Illusion, is your teacher currently in stable health and ready to travel for prosthetic limb transplant surgery?" The Eye of Illusion quickly set down his wineglass, straightened his posture, and said seriously, "Indeed, despite having lost both legs and an arm, the teacher has largely recovered thanks to the meticulous care of Benoit, Mr. Mithril Unicorn. He can at least withstand the rigors of the journey." Harvey plucked up a piece of tender, seared lamb with his silver fork, and chewed it, his brow furrowing slightly as if in thought. The Eye of Illusion felt a bit awkward, so it could only pick up the cutlery in front of it and politely accompany them. However, this red wine-marinated pan-fried lamb was indeed delicious, countless times more skilled than the chef at the inn in Jackdaw Town. And this incredibly delicious wild mushroom soup, the chef had actually added some magical herbs as spices to it. Just a few sips and I could feel the magical energy in my mind and body being slightly nourished. What a luxury. Wait. I'm here to request and discuss the teacher's limb transplant surgery. How can I indulge in these mundane foods and fine wines? The Eye of Illusion's face twitched a few times. He forced himself to break away from the temptation of delicious food, raised his head with difficulty and continued the previous topic. "Mr. Kilthuzad, if my teacher can arrive in your territory in 2 months, I wonder when the limb transplant surgery can be performed? Please forgive my rudeness. Madam Astrologer and I are still a little worried about the safety and success rate of this operation." Harvey took the warm and wet towel handed to him by the waiter and wiped his mouth. He smiled and clapped his hands and said, "I guess you have been worrying about this issue all this time. You probably have no intention of enjoying the delicious food and wine in front of you. Well, please follow me to the laboratory. Later, I will explain to you in detail the process of this transplant surgery and the possible risks involved." The Eye of Illusion looked at the spacious, bright and well-equipped underground laboratory in front of him and couldn't help but sigh. "I have never seen a magic laboratory of this scale in the circle of independent spellcasters. I am afraid that only the leaders of the Federation spellcasters like Alair have the resources and ability to build it. In the center of the vast laboratory hall, giant brass instruments, approximately 4 or 5 meters tall, stood side by side. Countless silver black metal pipes connected them to various other magical instruments. The massive instruments seemed to be constantly operating, emitting a faint, low hum. At the far end of the laboratory's main entrance were several separate rooms partitioned off by crystal glass. The glass walls were densely covered with inscriptions depicting rituals and spells, seemingly serving as a testing ground for magic. This enchanted crystal glass wall was expensive to build, and no one in the entire Southern Territory, save the Alchemy Quest Society, could replicate and mass-produce it. Behind the giant brass columns were several large teleportation arrays, encased in a special metal iron. They appeared to be the magical network instant teleportation arrays frequently used by members of the Spellcaster Forum. Next to a row of silver-white metal lab tables were 2 metal racks holding alchemical prostheses. Next to the racks was a vertical operating table, fitted with numerous belt buckles and fasteners. Mr. Kilthuzid, he must have conducted quite a few live magical experiments. The Eye of Illusion simply looked around silently, not asking about the purpose of the various instruments. This was basic etiquette and rule of the magical world. One must never rashly delve into the results and details of others' magical experiments. Harvey, still with his chosen local guide, Uriel, disassembled his brass mechanical prosthesis and personally performed some simple adjustments and maintenance. Mr. Eye of Illusion, you can now directly see the internal structure of this alchemical prosthesis. I'm sorry that I can't share with you the transplantation technology involved, but there are indeed certain risks during the operation. My laboratory assistant and I cannot guarantee your safety. He pointed to a section of the disassembled mechanical prosthesis that looked like a metal shaft and patiently explained, this is the energy core that drives the entire prosthesis. To maintain its long-term operation, in addition to regular maintenance, the most important thing is to transplant the recipient's own soul and mental strength. Otherwise, the entire prosthesis will be like a dead object and will quickly reject the recipient's flesh and blood. Eye of Illusion had no knowledge of alchemical mysteries, but he could roughly understand Harvey's explanation. He asked hesitantly, once the rejection reaction occurs, the prosthesis will malfunction, and then the part that connects to the living person will suffer symptoms of corruption and decay. Is that correct? Harvey nodded. Yes, you can think of it as a common sepsis, a complication of severed limbs that is more deadly than wound infection. The damage caused is more severe on the caster who is already weak. Uriel stroked the healed part of his severed limb and interrupted with a lingering fear, when my arm was cut off, if someone hadn't pressed a red-hot iron directly on the wound to iron it, I might have died of excessive blood loss or severe infection. The Eye of Illusion couldn't help but shudder. He couldn't bear to imagine that if Teacher Duncan hadn't been rescued in time by Benoit and hadn't drunk a large amount of expensive high-level healing potions, he would probably have suffered and eventually died. So, Mr. Kilthuzid, the risks of transplant surgery you mentioned are the problem of corrosive infection of the wound, correct? Harvey smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying softly, I can completely avoid and solve the infection problem. The real difficulty is that the greater the degree of limb disability, the more soul and mental energy is required to drive the prosthesis. In the end, the main soul of the transplant recipient will be suppressed by the soul core of the alchemical prosthesis. If the primary and secondary are not distinguished, it will lead to unpredictable and dangerous consequences. He raised his hand and pointed to the 2 cups of magical reagents of different colors placed on the laboratory table, and said metaphorically, if this red potion is compared to your teacher, Mr. Duncan, and these 3 blue potions are the prosthetic parts he needs to transplant, Harvey directly picked up the blue potion and poured it into the glass of red potion, watching quietly as it gradually turned indigo purple. Look at the color of this potion, just like the soul of the surgery recipient, even the color has changed. The Eye of Illusion stared blankly at the indigo solution that was excessively mixed with blue. After a moment, he came to his senses and said in a trembling voice, you mean, if too much is transplanted, it will seriously affect the recipient's own soul and mental thinking, leading to a drastic change in temperament or mental confusion? Harvey said in a deep voice, I have never used live experiments to verify it, so I can't give you an accurate answer, but it is very likely that something that none of us can accept will happen. Severe amnesia, intellectual disability, sensory disorder, limb incoordination, all may happen. After all, it was a risky experiment to sew together several souls. He didn't want to think that in the end, The teacher of the Eye of Illusion would have his main soul eroded and assimilated by the souls of other transplanted living creatures, and finally turn into a humanoid chimpanzee who could only drool and eat bananas all day long. Chapter 262 The Secret of Illusion. The Eye of Illusion rested his hands on the lab table, frowning silently. Indeed, the ability to regenerate a person with amputated limbs through the use of artificial prosthetics, ensuring the same flexibility and compatibility as their original flesh and blood, in some sense, was infinitely close to the lost art of flesh regeneration from ancient times. It was said that the Church of Light still possessed some modified regeneration techniques, but these were forbidden divine arts that allowed the naturally aged and dying to be rejuvenated. Such a miraculous and powerful alchemical secret technique, easily accomplished without any risk or cost to the recipient, was practically impossible. If both legs and one arm were transplanted simultaneously, the risk would also increase threefold. However, if only an upper limb was transplanted, the success rate would be much higher. Just like Mr. Uriel, whom I know well, he quickly adapted to his new metal limb and looked no different from a normal, healthy human. Harvey noticed the other man's hesitation and worry and whispered soothingly, "If the risks are considered, I suggest only transplanting a partial limb. The arm is more important, both for spellcasters and ordinary people. Lower limb disabilities can be replaced with a wheelchair." The Eye of Illusion raised a hand to rub his stiff face and sighed softly. "I considered this at first, too, but you don't understand. My teacher, Mr. Duncan, is a high-level arcane spellcaster skilled in transfiguration. Even among the Union, he is a genius." He closed his eyes and continued with some reluctance, "If he can't restore his limbs, he will never be able to perform transfiguration, his most powerful spell. For a battle mage, this is almost unacceptable." Harvey opened his mouth, but held back the words that were about to burst out. He had no evidence of a high-level transfiguration mage being able to perform transfiguration normally after having alchemical prosthetics implanted. As far as he knew, arcane spellcasters' transfiguration relied entirely on magical power to simulate the transformation of flesh and blood. This was also accompanied by specialized transfiguration potions, infused with a target creature's flesh and blood, to achieve the perfect transformation and acquire its powerful traits. With so much flesh and blood missing, even the ability to transform would likely be limited, not to mention the potential for morphological changes during transfiguration after having metal prosthetics implanted. The thought of transforming the teacher into a magical transformer, a hybrid of flesh and blood and mechanics, was a terrifying thought. Thinking of this, Harvey decided to first gain a deeper understanding of the patient's condition before making any plans. He cautiously asked, "Mr. Eye of Illusion, are you also an arcane spellcaster who studied transfiguration under Mr. Duncan?" The sudden shift in the topic towards himself surprised Eye of Illusion. After a moment's deliberation, he replied, "I am an arcane spellcaster who specializes in both illusion and transfiguration." "Why? Do you have any questions about arcane spellcasting?" From his limited knowledge of the forums, Eye of Illusion vaguely remembered that Mr. Kilthuzad was a high-level elemental spellcaster who also practiced alchemy, specializing in the unusually unpopular non-basic elemental school. The experimental research paper on electromagnetics he uploaded to the MagicNet forums encyclopedia suggested he had delved deeply into the subject, perfectly integrating theory and practice. Harvey, realizing the other party might have misunderstood him, believing he was indirectly trying to inquire about his school of thought and ability level, shook his head and smiled bitterly. "What I'm saying is, if you accept, you can use the transfiguration technique you learned from your teacher to demonstrate it to me, so I can better understand its properties. This will help me avoid many of the risks associated with implants when designing and manufacturing prosthetic limbs." In the castle's underground laboratory, Harvey dismissed Uriel and several soldiers guarding the laboratory, leaving behind only 4 bloodline warrior guards who insisted on ensuring his safety. Traditionally, when a spellcaster demonstrates or exchanges spells with another, no one else should be present. This adheres to ancient wizard etiquette and also serves to prevent the secrets of the spell from being easily leaked. However, warrior retainers who have achieved a bloodline bond with the spellcaster are considered an exception. After all, in the eyes of most traditional wizards, they are not considered independent individuals, but rather weapons and tools surrounding the wizard's lineage leader. The Eye of Illusion removed a crystal test tube half filled with a thick black liquid from its magic storage ring and explained apologetically, "Transfiguration requires exceptionally high talent from the caster. Although I've studied with my teacher for nearly 10 years, I've only mastered the method of transforming one magical creature. Furthermore, I only have a limited supply of transfiguration potions this time, so I can only demonstrate it to you once. With the Eye of Illusion's consent, Harvey accepted the potion and examined it with keen interest. Unlike common alchemical potions and magical elixirs, this special magical catalyst, as dark as ink, was so different from other potions. Even through the enchanted crystal test tube, the moment it touched his hand, Harvey could faintly feel his flesh and magical veins stirring. His skin tingled with a slight tingle, a terrifying sensation as if the coarse fur of a wild animal were about to sprout. If you need to transform and simulate a certain magical creature, you have to find the flesh and blood of that kind of creature and add it to the spellcasting potion. Then those shapeshifters in ancient times who could transform into terrifying dragon creatures, wouldn't they? Eye of Illusion took the potion handed back by Harvey and responded with some pride. Yes, if you want to transform into a dragon creature, you must have the ability to hunt and obtain their flesh and blood. My teacher is from the oldest wizard family in the south. During the Dragon War, there were legendary wizards in the family who transformed into powerful ancient dragons and fought with real dragons. As soon as he said this, Harvey immediately thought of the historical story that Asdalun had told him before, that group of ancient wizards who went to the depths of the northern wilderness and established a kingdom of eternal night. Weren't they a wizard family that sought promotion in battles with dragons and called themselves dragon chasers? Could there be some unknown connection between the two? Or could it be that Mr. Eye of Illusion's teacher was actually a descendant of a branch of the dragon chaser wizard family, but was forgotten in the southern border during the family's migration? These secret histories were not convenient to discuss directly. Harvey put away his chaotic thoughts and politely raised his hand to gesture. Mr. Eye of Illusion, then please demonstrate to me the advanced transformation of the arcane spellcaster. Chapter 263 Insurance Proposal for Surgery. Mr. Eye of Illusion, do you really not need to remove your clothing before performing transfiguration? Or should I arrange for someone to prepare a change of clothes for you in advance? Harvey suggested, somewhat euphemistically, as he observed the young high-level spellcaster diligently preparing the ritual. Haha. Don't worry, my robe is a magical tool in itself. It can be absorbed and attached to the skin, so it won't be damaged by the transformation. Fire and transfiguration spellcasters often refine their magical tools into portable clothing and robes. After all, whether performing a flame possession spell or a high-level transfiguration spell, being left naked after terminating the spell due to damage to clothing would be a disgrace to any high-level spellcaster. Eye of Illusion didn't rely solely on a single bottle of transfiguration potion to perform the transfiguration spell. Instead, he drew several ingredients from his storage ring, seemingly extracted from some kind of beastly magical creature. Using a magical solvent instead of ink, he quickly drew a small ritual circle on the clean, brightly lit laboratory floor. He then stepped into the center of the circle and began to chant silently. So, arcane spellcasters' transfiguration spells don't have instantaneous effects, they require elaborate rituals and preparations. No wonder most transfiguration wizards also practice other arcane magics, and it's rare to find a pure transfiguration wizard, Harvey thought to himself as he stood by. The incantations used by the Eye of Illusion weren't the common language of the continent. Harvey wasn't well versed in spellcraft, and could only barely discern a mixture of Orcish and ancient wizard language, making the chanting somewhat strange and awkward. After a lengthy incantation, the Eye of Illusion uncorked the glass tube and downed half the thick black potion. Then, his body began to twist unnaturally, accompanied by the crackling sound of bones shifting and grinding. Then, his body began to rapidly expand and grow, thick, wiry gray-black hair sprouting from his skin. The mage's short robes he had worn gradually faded into his skin, and the rapid, heavy breathing of a transfiguration wizard followed. After a few minutes, the Eye of Illusion completed its transfiguration. A 4 to 5 meter tall, wolf-headed, humanoid monster stood slightly hunched in the center of the magic circle. It turned its head and glared crimson eyes at Harvey, who stood guard nearby. 4 bloodline warriors, swords drawn, gathered in formation. Harvey, however, keenly noticed a glimmer of humanity in the werewolf's eyes, betraying no hostility or aggression. Mr. Eye of Illusion, Harvey asked tentatively, only to receive a low wolf howl. It seemed that while transfiguring, the caster couldn't speak like a human. The werewolf wizard suddenly blinked, a playful, provocative expression on his face. He raised his thick, furry arm and pointed at a guard standing in front of Harvey, who had activated his great strength bloodline talent. Mr. Eye of Illusion, I'm afraid I'd like to spar with you. Don't use weapons, and be careful. Harvey patted his eager guard encouragingly. The soldier, panting, lunged forward. The bloodline warrior rushed in front of the werewolf, meeting its massive fist head-on. Reflexively, he crossed his arms to block his face. With a thud, the guard stumbled back 2 steps. Stabilizing himself with a lunge and retaliating with a powerful punch, the punch originally aimed straight for the werewolf's chest, but suddenly deflected mid-flight, slamming into the werewolf's ribs. Harvey's lip curled slightly. This was a trick Pierce had mentioned during their daily close combat training. The canine's weakness was its iron head, iron bones, tofu waist. The werewolf reacted swiftly, twisting its waist to avoid a fatal kidney strike, its clawed hand reaching for the bloodline warrior's crotch with lightning speed. Mr. Illusionized transformation makes his attack so brutal and direct, Harvey couldn't help but burst out laughing. The guard reached down and twisted the werewolf's arm, ready to swing it sideways with a powerful breath, but the werewolf, more than twice his height, silently opened its mouth and clamped down on the back of his neck. Had the werewolf exerted even a little more force, the guard's neck would have been severed instantly, with no chance of survival. Harvey laughed and applauded, then told the guard, whose face flushed with shame, to retreat. He soothed him gently. You may lack combat experience, but you've made excellent use of your natural abilities to withstand a head-on attack from a 4 or 5 meter tall werewolf. The illusion eye finished its transformation, and after a sound of bone and muscle grinding, it slowly returned to its original, slender, elegant form, its robes, which had been veiled in its skin, resurfacing. If I cast transfiguration at full power, I can maintain my werewolf form for approximately an hour. During this time, I gain the werewolf's unique magic resistance, bloodlust, and night vision. He proactively described the effects of the spell to Harvey. Harvey nodded, then walked over to the lab table and quickly wrote down his transfiguration observations with pen and paper. So, if it were your teacher, Mr. Duncan, how long could he maintain the spell? Besides werewolf form, are there other beast forms that consume more mana? The Eye of Illusion was silent for a moment, then replied in a low voice, besides werewolf form, your teacher is also adept at transforming birds. Of course, for the past decade or so, he's been researching how to break the mimicry of a certain sub-dragon beast. Unfortunately, he only tried it once, in a critical moment, and it went wrong, so that's how it was. It seems their initial request for help on the forum was to address the after effects of their teacher's failed transfiguration attempt. This ancient wizarding spell, originating from ancient times, is indeed extremely risky. I have a safer proposal, but I need to wait until I meet your teacher in person and let him make the final decision. The Eye of Illusion widened his eyes and said in surprise, a safer way? Can it also restore the teacher's limbs to a healthy state? Please tell me in advance. I will convey it to the teacher and the astrologer, please. Harvey pointed to a brand new alchemical prosthesis hanging on a metal bracket, and whispered, I suggest that the transplant operation be carried out as usual. Once the operation fails or there is a problem, your teacher's soul will be transferred as a whole and placed in an alchemical prosthesis. We have already used the technology in this area very maturely. What? Soul transfer? To accommodate the soul of a living person into an alchemical creation? Isn't this the most important part of the life alchemy plan that the Exploration Society has been pursuing? Could it be that you have cracked the trick? The Eye of Illusion was so shocked that he could hardly speak, and asked in a somewhat inappropriate manner. Harvey smiled and pointed at Reiner and Asdalin, who were slowly walking out of the laboratory. He chuckled and explained, yes, these 2 assistants of mine are alchemical beings that contain human souls. If your teacher accepts this proposal, we need to sign a secret contract. I don't want to be investigated by the Federation and the Church. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264, The Hybrid Elves. Igno, the director of the Territory Hospital, finished his day's work, changed out of his crisp white work clothes, donned the now favored civilian gentleman's formal attire, and slowly made his way to the alchemy laboratory. Tonight, he had an appointment with Chris, the director of the alchemy laboratory, to visit the magical botanical garden to see a unique magical plant that blooms only at night. The frontier territory today is completely different from when he first arrived. It's hard to imagine it was once a ruined site of ancient wizardry. Now, it's covered in gray-black, hard, smooth roads. Neat rows of concrete houses line the tree-lined streets, the ground floor used for business, the second floor for daily living. However, this new residential area hasn't had many residents yet. The territory city hall has just listed the properties for sale. At the intersection, residents of the territory constantly paused in front of the houses, likely families coming after get-off work to view the properties. Each family was accompanied by a young city hall apprentice, enthusiastically explaining the advantages of the new homes to the buyers. The townhouses were set back about 7 or 8 meters from the street, separated by verdant lawns and flagstone-covered gutters, a clear dividing line. It was said that if you bought a house, you could fence off the lawns in front and back, receiving a free garden nursery. It had to be said that compared to the bustling but densely populated and sprawling magical capital of Alair, the cityscape of the frontier territory was noticeably neater and cleaner. Houses, roads, shops, and trees were all neatly arranged in fixed positions, like pieces on a checkered chessboard. There was a sense of uniform beauty, much like the rows of magical plants planted in his potion garden, perfectly coordinated and arranged. According to Lord Harvey, this was the beauty of pure order. Egno is now quite well known within the territory. Unlike the low-key Dallin and Reiner, who shun the spotlight, and the stern Pierce, he possesses none of the condescending airs of a spellcaster. He greets and treats the inhabitants of the hospital with a warm and patient demeanor, making them feel at home. Passers-by he encounters along the way nod or tip their hats, smiling and addressing him as Lord Egno. However, he prefers the title Mr. Dean, which conveys a more friendly and professional air, rather than the more prestigious Your Excellency. Across 2 streets from the new residential area, one finds the alchemy laboratory where Chris works, a specialized facility nominally affiliated with the industrial sector but effectively operating independently. It has long collaborated closely with the hospital's pharmaceutical research and development department. As Egno reached the entrance, he saw an official from the City Hall's population department emerge alongside Chris. Lord Egno, you've arrived just in time, the young official saluted with a smile. The city registration office has sent word that 7 or 8 people have arrived from the southern border, bearing letters of recommendation from you and Director Chris. However, their identities cannot be verified, and they're currently being held at the city gate. I've hurried over to inform you too. He coughed awkwardly, as if trying to decide how to phrase his words. He raised his hand and pointed at his ear, mumbling, "They look like they were from your clan." "It's Sandra." Egno excitedly exchanged a glance with Chris. "Hurry, get to the registration office at the city gate. We'll greet her in person." Pulling Chris towards the south gate, they saw a familiar figure standing in front of the registration shed. Egno took a closer look and saw it was indeed Sandra, his close friend and fellow clansman from the southern border, also of half-elven blood. Mr. Egno. By the golden tree. It's really you." The young fellow, eagle-eyed, also spotted the hurried arrival of the two and jumped up and waved his hands in excitement. Chris took out the entry permit signed by Harvey himself from his pocket and handed it to the captain of the defense army. "This is the talent specially approved by the Lord. It's a little late today. I will take them to the city hall to register their identity information tomorrow." The captain of the defense army saluted, took the entry permit and carefully examined it. "Sir, before their identity registration, they are only allowed to stay in the guest house for foreign guests. This is the rule. Please forgive me." Egno was already accustomed to the official style of these civilian soldiers. He smiled indifferently and said, "It doesn't matter. Then let them settle in the guest house first. It's really hard for them on the way." Sandra, who was finally allowed to pass, quickly caught up with the two of them, muttering softly, "Are these soldiers guarding the city the Lord's personal guards? They checked too strictly. They almost asked about my ancestral origin. I couldn't get them to give in even with a small bag of silver coins." Chris couldn't help but chuckled. "A bag of silver coins? How many are there?" "A full 10. Sandra was stunned for a moment, but answered honestly. "Ha ha 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 ha." Chris and Egno looked at each other and laughed at the same time. "Even if there were no territorial laws, your money would not be enough to bribe these soldiers. Their monthly salary is at least 120 gold yuan. If converted into silver coins, the amount is the same." "What are gold yuan?" "The Lord's privately minted coins." "But 120 silver coins, that's more than a gold pound. How can an ordinary civilian soldier get so much pay?" Does the lord here own several gold and silver mines? Egno stopped laughing and replied seriously, you can't copy what you saw and heard in the cities of the noble lords in the southern border here. Compared to those noble private soldiers who make money by levying city taxes and extorting civilians, the soldiers of the pioneering territory are treated comparable to those of lower-class nobles and small landowners with small fiefs. Naturally, they disdain to bully and exploit others. Moreover, the military law in the territory is strict. Extortion, looting, or private bribery are strictly prohibited. Once discovered, the person will be handed over to the military court. The lightest punishment is expulsion from the army, and the most serious is direct hard labor. However, Chris and Egno, as technical officials, were obviously not interested in these territorial policies and laws, and quickly changed the subject. Sandra, we clearly sent you a letter 3 months ago. Why did it arrive here only now? And there was no news in the middle. I almost worried that something had happened to you. Sandra sighed and whispered, you know, I have been detained in the Federation branch in Orland. At first, they said they would send me back to Noreen for trial and processing within the elves, but then I don't know why they dragged it on. If you hadn't found a way to use the relationship with LA, we don't know how long we would have to suffer in prison. Hybrid elves like Sandra were slightly different from Egno. Most of them had some elven blood in their ancestors, making their alien bloodline extremely rare. While they retained some unique elven features, many lacked a natural affinity for the elements. After establishing themselves in the territory through hard work and exceptional ability, Egno immediately remembered their distant relative, imprisoned in Orland. He immediately pleaded with Harvey to use his connections within the Union to release them and invite them to serve the Lord in the frontier territory. Harvey, naturally, welcomed these hybrids, born with a natural talent for potions, and the more they came, the better. With a simple gesture, he granted them all their requests to join the territory. Chapter 265. Pioneer and receive the well-off 3-piece set. Sandra and her group were arranged to rest up at the territory's guest house for the night. Then, early in the morning, Egno dragged them to the city hall to register their identities. Chris, one of their guarantors, skipped work for half a day to accompany them. Little Sandra, do you think the frontier territory is any different from other cities you've been to in the southern territory? Egno rolled his eyes helplessly at Chris's question. This guy was about to start showing off again. The young half-blood was very honest. After looking around for a while, he scratched his head and said, that's very different. Not only is the entire territory brand new and clean, with no trace of feces on the ground, but many of the things I saw along the way are new and strange things I've never seen before. He pointed to the bicycles that passed by the crowd and said in amazement, for example, this alchemical mount that looks like a metal frame is obviously not a living thing. It can move forward quickly on 2 wheels just by pushing the rider's legs. It's amazing. Another half-blood elf fellow beside him raised his head and stared at the 12-barrel-shaped iron towers behind the townhouses, exclaiming, what are these giant iron towers for? Why can we see one every other row of houses? It seems to be cast from iron sheets. What noble lord would not cast wrought iron into weapons instead of wasting it on building such strange things? Chris immediately shook his head proudly. He'd had a hand in designing and building the water tower and its heating system, so he had to brag about it to these little bumpkins from the southern border. It's called a high-pressure water tower. It uses alchemical instruments to directly pump river water, filter it, and heat it. Every house equipped with this water tower has instant access to scalding hot water just by turning on the tap. Even in the wilderness winter, there's no need to worry about the water freezing. Sandra then remembered that they'd seen that same brass water valve in the guest house bathroom. No one had dared to try it because they didn't know how to use it. Now they knew it actually worked. Egno observed the slightly awkward expressions of his kin and smiled reassuringly. Leave behind those backward experiences of the past. This is a completely different new home. Believe me, before long, you'll all love and enjoy life here. He couldn't help but exchange a glance with Chris as he spoke. For some reason, as they introduced their territory to the newcomers, they felt a strange sense of pride and joy, as if they were showing off a significant invention, a mixture of satisfaction and pride. After completing their identity registration at the city hall window, 7 or 8 timid young half-elves, sucking on their pricked fingers, each received a small card that glowed softly. Take good care of your ID cards. Always carry them with you for inspection. If you lose them, come here as soon as possible to get replacements. Whether renting an apartment or collecting a salary, You rely on this little document, Igno patiently reiterated to his kin, consciously shouldering the responsibility of elders to care for the younger generation. Like him, many of these young half-elves were orphaned early. Since birth, their half-blood status had forced them to live in hiding throughout the southern borders. Some had even been captured and held for long periods by the Union, leaving them with a life of constant hardship. Mr. Igno, we don't have the money to rent a house right now. But don't worry, we made plans when we arrived. We'll build a shelter outside the city for now, and move in when we have more money. The young men excitedly discussed their acceptance into the territory, their faces beaming with anticipation and satisfaction. They didn't believe that having been accepted by the Lord through Igno's connections meant they had to rely on their kinsmen. Instead, they planned to establish themselves independently. Igno felt a slight pang in his heart. He quickly raised his hand to silence their chatter, saying gently, "Don't worry. We've already arranged accommodations. How could we bear to have you living out in the wilderness outside the city? Come with me. I'll take you to the apprentice apartments." Sandra stared at the 3 or 4-story gray concrete building before her, stunned for a moment, not knowing what to say. Magic building? Is this a magical building like the Mage's Tower? Are we even qualified to live here, Mr. Igno? The job you mentioned in your letter about us being assigned to serve as lab assistants or apprentices for a certain spellcaster within the territory, by the Golden Tree. There's more than one building. Look, there are 2 identical ones in the back. Oh. Each building has gardens in front and behind. These plants are grown by magical energy. Even the private estates of noble lords can't compare to the beauty and comfort of this place. I can't believe we get to live here. Igno couldn't help but smile as he listened to the young people's exclamations. All right, everyone, be quiet. From now on, you will be potion apprentices, and the territory will provide you with housing free of charge. It's in this building right in front of you, and each of you will have a single room with a private bathroom. The 2 buildings at the back, one for magic apprentices and the other for alchemy apprentices, are very friendly. Once you get familiar with them, you can hang out with them more often. They're all very friendly. Everyone cheered immediately after hearing this. Only Sandra looked a little worried. She approached Igno and asked cautiously, "Mr. Igno, you're providing us with housing for no reason. Don't we have to work for the Lord?" "Of course we have to work and study at the same time. You only need to work with me for half a day at the potions garden every day, and the rest of the time you need to study at the spellcaster school. Mr. Chris and I will also be teaching there," the youngest half-elf asked timidly. "Then, will we get paid for our work?" "Of course we do. It won't be as much as the soldiers in the army, but it's enough for you to eat whatever you want, buy some new clothes, and improve your quality of life. I want a bicycle that can be pedaled quickly with my legs." Igno led the young people into the lobby on the first floor of the apartment and said with a smile, "Bicycles will be available. There is a special store selling them in the market area. You can buy one for only 300 gold yuan. Apprentices can get discounts and pay in installments with their ID cards. You know, a bicycle is one of the standard 3-piece set of a well-off life among the people in the territory. Not just you, almost everyone wants to own one." "What is the 3-piece set of a well-off life?" Igno pointed to the brass metal pipes installed on the wall and said with a smile, "The heated water supply facilities in the house, the light and fast bicycles, and the magic lighting hanging from the roof. These are the 3-piece set of a well-off life in the Pioneer Territory." Chapter 266 Territory High-Level Meeting. In late autumn in the northern wastes, Harvey convened a meeting of the territory's top brass in the castle's meeting hall. Over 2 years ago, when he first began building the frontier territory, Harvey relied on only 2 alchemical beings, a hybrid, and a dozen or so refugees rescued from the fell orcs. Most of them, with the exception of Arsterlin, were illiterate. Now, his territory's management has grown to nearly 100 people, among them apprentice knights abducted by fell orcs, ordinary watchmakers, impoverished hunters, tax-evading serfs from the southern nobility's fiefdoms, refugees from the wastelands, or orcs. 99% of them have kept pace with the territory's development, successfully completing literacy education and vocational training to become qualified feudal civil servants. This configuration is completely advanced in the contemporary human kingdoms of the southern region, and in some ways, it completely subverts the traditional model of feudal lord and king rule. Most landed nobles typically employed only 2 or 3 stewards to coordinate and issue the lord's orders. Under them were tax collectors responsible for various tax categories. These mid and lower-level officials were scattered throughout the vast fiefdom, and all day-to-day management revolved around collecting taxes and amassing wealth for the lord. Agricultural taxes, commercial taxes, road tolls, and taxes on believers collected on behalf of the church, these were relatively common and reasonable taxes. More demanding and greedy nobles would impose a wider variety of additional levies, a forest tax for felling trees and collecting firewood, a grazing tax for raising poultry and livestock, a brewing tax for privately brewing alcohol, and a mill tax for visiting the Lord's mill. Harvey had heard of even more absurd justifications for taxation. Serfs and free peasants under the Lord's rule were required to pay a tax for marriages, funerals, and even inheritance taxes for their descendants after their death. The concentrated trinity of wealth, land, and power inevitably hindered regional economic and demographic development. Over time, this would breed irreconcilable and sharp conflicts between the ruling class and the common serfs. This was a fact deeply felt and understood by Harvey, a time traveler who had long since learned from history books about past mistakes. Thanks to the rapid population growth and accommodation, each administrative and manufacturing department in the frontier territory gradually took shape. As the central authority for coordinating all matters within the territory, the City Hall finally achieved the maturity and perfection Harvey had envisioned. He no longer had to personally handle everything, bear it in the tedious task of researching laws and regulations and formulating development plans, as he had at the beginning. Now, Harvey could simply propose a simple idea or concept, and Reiner and Asdelin, who had long collaborated with him, would immediately grasp the key points. They would then, through City Hall officials, break down the work into specific tasks and quickly assign them to various departments, effectively ensuring that tasks and responsibilities were assigned to specific individuals and implemented swiftly and efficiently. Having two alchemical beings capable of absolute rationality assist him in managing such a vast frontier territory was, in Harvey's opinion, the most satisfying and wisest decision. It almost completely eliminated most potential top-down corruption and bureaucratic cliques, ensuring Harvey's absolute credibility among the people as the supreme ruler of the territory. This was the first time Harvey had convened such a formal high-level meeting. Those summoned to attend were the highest officials from various agencies and departments. In addition to City Hall Chief Reiner and the Lord's Chief Advisor Asdelin, there were also Army Commander Pierce, high-ranking military officers led by Vaughn and others, Minister of Construction Heru, Deputy City Hall Chief Orange, Chief Superintendent Urio of the Police Department, Minister of Agriculture, Director of the Medical Center and Deputy Minister of Agriculture Egno, Minister of Industry and Deputy Minister and Director of the Alchemy Laboratory Chris, and the Minister of Education. Furthermore, the recently established Spellcaster Academy, affiliated with the Ministry of Education, welcomed its first president and professor of theory, Duarte Holden, a young mid-level spellcaster directly assigned to the position by Harvey. This young wizard, though descended from a family of spellcasters, had previously held clerical positions within the Union. He possessed a remarkable talent for educating and training apprentices. He possessed a wealth of magical theory at his fingertips, and his teaching plans were exceptionally well crafted, earning even the ever-critical Arstelin's praise. The temperatures in the northern wastes were already freezing in late autumn, and Harvey's Lord's Castle had already begun using a hot water heating system. The conference hall was now covered in thick animal hide carpets, ensuring that even the lightly dressed attendees felt no discomfort at all. The meeting room fell into hushed silence, everyone holding their breath as Harvey reviewed the department's work summary, bracing themselves for the Lord's call on them. Today's meeting agenda should last a long time, so each department should just treat it as an end-of-year summary report in advance. Anyway, the evil orcs will come back after winter, and we won't have much free time to hold another meeting then. Harvey took a sip of the warm fruit tea brought by the waiter, took out a report and casually instructed, "Let's start with the Ministry of Agriculture, which has just completed the autumn harvest." The Ministry of Agriculture is actually managed by Reiner himself. The current minister is just a figurehead. Although he is one of the first batch of experienced wasteland farmers to join the territory, he is already quite old. If he holds on for a few more years, he will probably retire. Therefore, this part of the work report is naturally replaced by Reiner himself. Reiner stood up and saluted Harvey. After looking around, he confidently spread out the work manual in front of him. "Sir, the grain harvest this autumn is about 35,000 bushels. If you don't count the more than 5,000 new residents who have just joined the territory, It can fully meet the food needs of the original more than 10,000 residents before next autumn. He paused, gently turned to the next page and continued, in addition, there are still 17,000 bushels of old wheat left in the grain warehouse. According to your request, half of it will be used as feed for livestock, and half will be transported to food processing plants for further processing. The butau that Reiner mentioned is a commonly used unit of measurement for wheat and barley in this world. It is a square barrel-shaped container made of wood and boards. Harvey only vaguely knew that one bushel should barely be equal to 100 kilograms, but this is not important. Anyway, as long as he knows that it is enough to feed his own people, it's fine. A small portion of the annual grain harvest was reserved for seed to be given to Igno for catalytic enchantment. Only about 60% of the harvest was released to the public for purchase in limited quantities with their ID cards. This was to prevent private hoarding and speculation, which would cause price instability in the territory. This was why he had always maintained a firm grip on land and grain cultivation. Allocating farmland to the people and letting them cultivate it themselves was firstly unfavorable for the widespread use of alchemical agricultural machinery, resulting in low yields, and secondly, feared that they would resist paying surplus grain to the lord. Frequent civilian uprisings in the fiefdoms of the nobles throughout the southern border were caused by the lord's violent confiscation of the hard-earned grain from serfs and free farmers. Therefore, from the outset, Harvey mandated that grain cultivation, production, and distribution be a monopoly of the city hall. Purchasers were required to present their ID cards and purchase in limited quantities according to a rationing system. The real name system completely prevented private hoarding and price fluctuations. But the most pressing issue now is that the arrival of over 5,000 new refugees from the southern border will clearly strain the territory's current food reserves. Until they receive jobs and wages, they will have to receive a full month's worth of free food from the city hall. Harvey frowned, pondering for a moment. He then stood and walked over to the territory map hanging on the wall behind him, slapping his hand heavily on the uncultivated wasteland east of the Glacier River. We must cultivate this land before winter arrives. This will give us time to sow the hardy barley next spring. Barley is more cold-resistant than wheat and has a shorter growing cycle, reaching maturity and harvest in approximately 90 days, thus addressing any potential food shortages before next autumn's harvest. Haru, the director of the construction department, and Pierce, the army commander, stood up simultaneously, exclaiming in surprise, "Sir, the East Coast isn't protected by the territory's walls. Even if we deploy a permanent defense force, we won't be able to withstand the frequent harassment from the fell orcs after winter. Besides, we simply don't have the manpower or energy to build a wall to protect the farmland on the east bank of the glacial river before winter sets in." Chapter 267, Military Settlement. Since the frontier territory gained towering walls stretching 20 to 30 miles, the inhabitants have finally felt a true sense of security. The northern wastelands are not only threatened by the rampage of evil orcs, but the cold, pristine environment and vast wildlife also pose a threat to the lives of refugees. In early winter, when the evil orcs could migrate south at any moment, reclaiming land across the icy river, so far from the territory, is a truly insecure prospect. "I'm planning to adjust the size of the army again," Harvey said thoughtfully, rubbing his chin. In the past year, aside from a single mission against a lone demon force, the Northern Army has had few overseas missions. The daily expenses and payroll of 2 battalions with over 2,000 men are incredibly high. Commander Pearson Battalion Commander Vaughn, struck by the Lord's words, shuddered inwardly and quickly listened attentively. The same goes for the defense forces. A battalion headquarters, staffed with over 1,000 men, is simply responsible for daily security within the territory. The police also share the burden of inspections and patrols, which represents a significant expense, even with the efficient logistics and food supply provided by alchemy beasts and numerous assembly line factories. A frontier territory of 10,000 men still struggles to support over 3,000 soldiers. A private military force of this magnitude, even surpassing the private armies of some smaller secular duchies and counties in the southern states, is a significant undertaking. Pierce spoke cautiously. "Sir, are you considering disbanding the army? If these soldiers lose their military status, what will become of them?" Harvey smiled and shook his head, explaining, "No, I do not intend to lay off these soldiers. They are professional soldiers I have painstakingly trained at great expense. In a place like the Northern Wastes, Surrounded by enemies, the army is our greatest source of survival. He then instructed his attendants to distribute the pre-prepared documents, which everyone read carefully. Military garrisons, garrison corps, what does this mean? Everyone was confused but didn't dare to ask Harvey first. They could only exchange puzzled glances or glance up at Harvey's face to guess his intentions. Don't be so reserved. It's normal for you not to understand, Harvey chuckled and explained slowly. I plan to transfer 500 people from the Northern Army and the Defense Army each, streamlining the original 1,000-man battalion to 500 people, forming 2 garrison battalions, stationed permanently on the east bank of the Glacier River. These soldiers will not only shoulder the tasks of defense and vigilance, but in the absence of external threats or emergency wars, they will also need to be involved in agricultural production and cooperate with the personnel sent by the Ministry of Agriculture to engage in grain planting. Pierce immediately understood the Lord's intention. Wasn't this just reversing the recruitment system of the previous Southern noble lords? Freemen and tenant farmers in noble lords' fiefs farmed and herded livestock during peacetime, paying taxes for their lords. However, in times of war, they were called upon by their lords to temporarily enlist, laying aside their farm tools and taking up arms to fight for their lords. This meant they simultaneously served as both farmers and militiamen. Harvey, however, reversed this practice. While ensuring the professional soldiers' duties and benefits, he also allowed them to take on the additional task of farming during their free time. With the aid of improved magical wheat seeds and agricultural alchemy beasts, they could not only fully support themselves but also generate a large surplus of food for the land. Just as Battalion Commander Vaughn was secretly considering whether having his soldiers farm could earn him a part-time salary, Lord Harvey opportunely raised the issue. Of course, we can't just give these soldiers a new task without any rewards or benefits. Based on the average monthly salary of a rank-and-file soldier in the Territorial Army, I believe we should provide them with some sort of settlement subsidy, or authorization to purchase scarce luxury goods. The specific details and implementation of this policy order were naturally left to Reiner and Pierce to discuss back home, so Harvey didn't bother to elaborate further. After discussing the Ministry of Agriculture's food production and the military's restructuring of settlements, Harvey turned his attention to Dallin and the young spellcaster, Dirt, who sat below him. You two, it's time to discuss education in the Commoner School and the Spellcaster Academy. Upon hearing the Lord's call, Chief Advisor Asdalin immediately stood and began his methodical report. As of this month, approximately 730 citizens have completed literacy education this year. Including those who completed literacy last year, approximately 1,500 civilians in the territory have completed literacy courses, including all officials working in City Hall and various departments. A 10% literacy rate would be considered incredible in any secular country in the Southern Territories. In this world where the transcendent and the ignorant coexist, literacy is considered by most to be a privilege reserved for spellcasters and nobles. Excellent. I'm very pleased with this achievement. Harvey couldn't help but clap his hands in encouragement. He understood the importance of universal education better than anyone else present. Aside from the fact that civilians with a basic education are more adept at complex technical tasks and administrative management, knowledge itself also offers the opportunity for class advancement and the acquisition of extraordinary powers. Indeed, those gifted with spellcasting talent don't inherit blood or genetic mutations, but rather, through constant learning from an endless supply of knowledge, they cultivate the seeds of wisdom that allow them to embark on the path of magic. This is why Harvey mandated that all youth and children under the age of 16 in the territory receive free basic education, at least completing literacy courses and achieving basic literacy. Naturally, among these children, approximately 1% of the brightest will be selected by the experienced Asdalin and Erd as candidates for magical apprenticeships, entering spellcasting schools for further study. The Spellcaster School is currently accepting apprentices and trainee apprentices for the elementary courses, a total of 76 people, who are allocated to 3 classes, alchemy, magic, and potions. Due to the shortage of magic teachers, Dirt, Chris, Egno and I are currently serving as part-time teachers. Asdalin finished his brief report, then bowed slightly to Harvey and sat down again. So few? If I remember correctly. These students also include a dozen or so magic apprentices brought by Dirt, the group of alchemy apprentices who are studying and working part-time under Chris, and the young compatriots from Egno who just moved in some time ago. Harvey frowned slightly and said a little dejectedly, among the indigenous residents in the territory, the number of children with spellcasting talents is so rare. Orange peel, who is in charge of population management in the city hall, saw that the Lord's face looked a little bad, and hurriedly said, "My lord, you must know that these children were refugees who couldn't even get enough food 2 or 3 years ago and had to worry about not surviving the winter. Being able to read and write is already very good. What's more, even if they don't have the talent to be a wizard, after they graduate from school, they will be technical talents that various departments will scramble for." Harvey sighed and could only helplessly comfort himself. "Well, although we can't train spellcasters, fortunately, after these children graduate, the employment rate is at least 100%, and there will be no terrible problem of being unemployed after graduation." Chapter 268 City Construction Preparation. After each department finished reporting on their work this year, Harvey cleared his throat and prepared to make his final summary speech for the meeting. The refugee shelter set up in Jackdaw Town needs to be retained for the time being. The army soldiers will be withdrawn, leaving behind a few staff members responsible for shelter registration, as well as vaccinators on duty on a rotating basis. Harvey paused, and looked at Asdalin, who looked up at him at the same time, and continued, "The Federation has begun to control the spread of the plague. The Church of Light is not to be outdone, and has begun distributing divine potions to civilians in St. Valen. They are obviously vying for the hearts and minds of the people and preparing public opinion in advance for the large-scale conflicts that may break out later." Asdalin stood up and added for Harvey, "Therefore, we need to continue to publicize the relevant policies for sheltering refugees, and try to attract more displaced people to the north before the war breaks out." "Understood, my lord." Everyone stood up and responded. Harvey raised his hand to let them sit down, took a sip of hot tea and continued, "The Dragonstone Chamber of Commerce sent a message saying that the current situation is under certain control and the previous bulk commodity transactions can be resumed. However, I don't plan to let them monopolize the territory's commodity export business." Reiner asked puzzledly, "Why?" "My lord, they have always been very generous in paying money and never inquired about our technical secrets. They are a good business partner." Harvey chuckled and pointed to the account book in front of him and said with a smile, "Although the territory independently issues paper credit currencies such as gold dollars, it essentially still needs gold and silver coins as value anchors. Everyone knows that each gold dollar is approximately equal to the purchase value of half a silver coin. This means that we need to spend more than 3,000 gold pounds every month just to pay salaries to the people of the entire territory. After just paying out this month's salaries, the City Hall currently has only more than 2,000 gold pounds in gold dollar reserves on its books, which is a relatively dangerous financial critical line. A large noble family in the southern border, with a fiefdom of comparable size, would collect all the taxes it could in various ways throughout the year, and the sum it would bring to Harvey's frontier territory would barely cover his monthly expenses, and that's assuming the territory is self-sufficient in food and most daily necessities. Currently, the frontier territory's only exports are the sale of magic stone power generators and the supply of energy cores and magic ammunition for the Annihilation Spear to the Federation, which can provide Harvey with long-term income. While the vaccine business has made a quick buck, it will eventually dry up. Relying solely on the export of civilian goods and the arms trade may not be enough to sustain the territory's rapidly growing construction expenditures in the future. So, I'll establish contact with several other large chambers of commerce of similar size to the Dragonstone Chamber of Commerce, and entrust them with exclusive distribution of our territory's specialty products, which will be distributed throughout the southern border to generate profits." Chris perked up at this and said in surprise, "Sir, you mean those fragrant soaps, specialty brews, for garments, and highly durable canned foods we've developed, can all be sold externally?" Harvey smiled and nodded. "Yes, indeed. Aside from strategically important military goods and magical vehicles, the production scale of all other civilian goods can be doubled. Each production department can add jobs and offer permanent employment contracts to newly recruited residents." He paused. "I plan to hold a Northern Territory product fair and invite representatives from the chambers of commerce on the list to attend. I'll then sign long-term contracts with them for exclusive sales. As for the exclusive sales rights for these products, of course, they will be subject to bidding, and the highest bidder will win." Everyone was buzzing about a resolution Harvey had suddenly proposed near the end of the meeting. The territory's substantial new external revenue meant even more funding for various departments, a development that undoubtedly excited the high-ranking officials present. Harvey paused for a moment before bringing up a topic that was even more shocking. There is one last item for today's meeting, and it is the most important. He paused, looked around and said, I plan to officially build a city here after the end of this winter, after we repel the evil orc tribes that are plundering from the south. In the future, this will no longer be just a frontier territory outside the national border, but a real wasteland city. He picked up the charcoal pencil and walked to the map hanging behind him and began to draw the city's boundaries. This wasteland city extends from the northern slope of Jackdaw Ridge in the south to the Mineral Canyon on the eastern foot of God's Ridge in the east, to the swamp area where we just established an outpost camp in the west, and to the outpost fortress in the Ice Valley in the north. Its area will be far larger than the territory of Earl Figan of Grizzly Castle, which is separated from us by a mountain, and it will even be larger than the royal fiefdom of Golden City in the capital of St. Valen. Everyone was instantly shocked by Harvey's words, and the entire conference hall was silent for a while. Dirt Hoden abruptly stood up and trembled. Sir, are you planning to declare your territory's independence directly without the king's authorization? The vast majority of those present were commoners of humble origins. The only one, Arsterlin, was a centuries-old old man who had lived in the north since childhood and had never set foot in the south. Aside from Dirt, who had previously served in the Union, no one truly understood Harvey's true intentions. Establishing a city, in a sense, in this era of feudal aristocracy ruling the secular world, was tantamount to establishing a nation. Many small duchies and counties in the south required their rulers to be descended from the royal family of a great power, personally authorized and allocated fiefs by the king, and then personally crowned in Goris, the city of grace, by the Pope. Only then were they eligible to establish a city and become a vassal state of a powerful kingdom. For a commoner like Harvey, relying solely on a pioneering order purchased from a fiefdom noble, to declare his fiefdom's independence in the northern wilderness was unprecedented. This was tantamount to a blatant challenge to the secular monarchy and a disregard for the king's authority, inevitably inviting armed attack from numerous surrounding nobles. A more martial king might even lead his army in person. Do you think this will bring the scourge of war to the frontier territory? Harvey paused, drawing the city's borders, and asked with a chuckle. How many private soldiers does the Count of Grizzly Territory have? How many troops does the Grand Duke of St. Valen have? A head-on clash between the Union and the Church is imminent. Who among them would spare a hand to aid these secular nobles in their struggle for power and profit over their fiefdoms? Harvey gently tossed his charcoal pencil toward the long conference table and slowly walked over to the high-backed chair at the head. I possess over 3,000 powerful soldiers capable of confronting the evil orcs and demons head-on and achieving overwhelming victory. I also possess thousands of war alchemy beasts devoid of human weaknesses and immune to bleeding and pain. I also possess vast and ample military logistics and reserves of weapons and ammunition. Harvey turned his gaze directly at the pale young spellcaster, Dirt, and asked softly, shouldn't the surrounding lords and kings be more afraid of me? Chapter 269 The Missing Legendary Chief. After the meeting, Harvey left Dirt, the only one who raised objections and doubts in the conference hall, alone. You are also a spellcaster who has entered the extraordinary class. Are you afraid of the mortal power of those secular kingdoms? Harvey smiled teasingly and waved his hand to let the young spellcaster sit opposite him. Or are you worried that the church will intervene and it will be disadvantageous to us? Duarte looked a little ashamed, his face flushed, and he said hesitantly, Sir, I am not afraid of the power of those secular nobles, nor am I very worried about the threat of the church. You once allowed me to observe the soldiers' training. I know very well that those standard magic weapons are difficult for even ordinary spellcasters and church priests to resist. Oh? Then what are you worried about? Oh, please forgive my stupidity. The education I received in the past was related to magic enlightenment on the one hand, and the aristocratic education from my family on the other hand. So I never thought that civilians without aristocratic blood could also. Harvey then remembered that this young man who is related to Mr. Son of Flame, their family had a quarter of royal blood in the wizard kingdom of Doss. In a sense, they could even be regarded as having the right to inherit the throne, but the order of succession was relatively late. A nobleman and a spellcaster, receiving a dual elite education from a young age, must have been instilled with a strong sense of class, placing immense emphasis on status and lineage. Harvey shook his head helplessly, sighing, but in the end, neither you nor your uncle chose to become nobles. Instead, you resolutely embarked on the path of magic, pursuing truth and wisdom. This demonstrates your disagreement with the idea that bloodline determines birth. He patted the young man's shoulder comfortingly, smiling and encouragingly. Now that you've arrived in my territory, Quickly change those rigid notions and integrate into this new social model. Believe me, you won't be disappointed with the territory's future development and the rewards you can gain from it. After sending away the nephew entrusted to his care by Mr. Son of Fire, Harvey stretched and prepared to return to his bedroom for a short nap before returning to work near midnight. In this regard, Harvey had never forgotten his original aspirations as a necromancer. His reverse day and night schedule perfectly matched his previous life as a university student, presenting no discomfort at all. Just as he was about to leave, Arslan hurried up from the underground laboratory and stopped Harvey at the stairs. "Sir, 2 union leaders in the forum have suddenly sent a request for contact." Arslan's tone was a little serious. "And they're not targeting Kilthuzad, but are directly contacting Administrator Turing and Observer Neumann at the same time. What's going on? Has the Union declared war on the Church so soon? Or has the counterattack against the demons in the Evil Moon Mountains gone awry? Have the demons found a way and a magical weapon to counter the Lance of Annihilation?" Harvey hurriedly arrived at the underground laboratory with Arslan and immediately sat down at the central instrument of the demon brain to log into the forum. It was Lord Soul Reaper Dawson and Lord Shadow Knight Gallagher. Harvey was puzzled. Where had Mr. Scorching Lord been? Why had he not shown up for several forum exchanges? Was he still in deep meditation? Administrator Turing, what's the reason for this sudden request for contact? Soul Reaper, Mr. Turing, we're truly sorry to bother you so suddenly. Due to the urgency of the situation, we've also taken the liberty of contacting Mr. Observer, but haven't received a response yet. Shadow Knight, according to protocol, we should have contacted the forum's agent, Mr. Kilthuzad, and then relayed the message through him. Please forgive me, but this matter involves the Federation's internal secrets, so we can only seek help directly from these 2 powerful beings. Harvey couldn't help but shudder. What kind of trouble could have caused 2 legendary leaders to approach him with such humility? This level of difficulty was probably beyond the ability of a mid-level spellcaster disguised as a mysterious and powerful being to resolve. Administrator Turing, that's fine, but just this once. In the future, please inform our agent first. Now, can you tell me what exactly happened? The 2 men on the opposite side were silent for a long time before new information slowly appeared on the crystal screen of the magic brain instrument. Soul Reaper, our colleague, Mr. Scorching Lord, has been confined to the top floor of the Sky Domain Magic Tower since entering a deep meditative state 2 months ago, confined within his own rune chamber. It's a sealed space established by the original founders of the Union, making it difficult for anyone else to sense or detect what's happening within. Shadow Knight, but when the appointed time came, he didn't emerge. We patiently waited another week, finally taking the risk of breaking the seal, only to discover the rune chamber was completely empty. Lord Sereth had vanished into thin air. Harvey frowned upon seeing this message. According to the 2 legendary chiefs, teleportation and teleportation were impossible within the rune chamber. Leaving the chamber required a ritual to unseal the space, leaving no trace. So these 2 legendary gentlemen mistook me, the forum administrator, for a famous detective, and asked me to help solve a case, the most bizarre and mysterious missing room case. Harvey couldn't help but cover his forehead, feeling the veins throbbing in his temples. This isn't just any missing person case. This is the disappearance of a legendary spellcaster, Administrator Turing. So? Do you think I can find Mr. Scorching Lord, Soul Reaper? The timing of this is too coincidental. It happened right after we left Alea and headed for the Evil Moon Mountains, and right when the Church was plotting against us in St. Valen, arresting and persecuting local spellcasters. Shadow Knight, we suspect His Excellency the Scorching Lord encountered some unforeseen incident during his deep meditation within the demonic web. This may be part of a targeted conspiracy by the Church. Harvey sighed. If the Church truly had the means to harm a legendary spellcaster within the Alea Union headquarters, then their request for his help would be futile. He wouldn't dare take on such a task. Administrator Turing, we shouldn't interfere too deeply in the conflict between spellcasters and the Church. He isn't providing you with weapons and helping you drive out the invading aliens enough to satisfy you? Dawson and Gallagher, sitting in front of the magic brain, glanced at each other. Their faces etched with unconcealed worry. If we rashly request this being, we're afraid we'll really anger him, but that Sereth, Dawson sighed, somewhat frustrated. Gallagher tugged at his black robe, which remained unchanged for years, and gritted his teeth, saying, the Union absolutely cannot afford to lose a leader. We have no choice but to seek help from Mr. Turing, no matter the cost. Shadow Knight, Mr. Turing, We have no intention of asking you to intervene in the dispute between the spellcasters and the church again. We simply ask for your help in confirming the situation of the Scorching Overlord and his current location. We suspect that he has escaped directly into the magical network space in his flesh and blood due to some accident. Chapter 270, Materialized Magic Web Wandering. Logically, legendary spellcasters like Soul Reaper and Shadow Knight wouldn't need to readily seek outside help. Both of them are renowned figures in the southern continent's magical world, and finding a mysteriously missing colleague wouldn't be completely impossible. However, the problem lies in the timing. Mr. Scorching Lord's disappearance coincided with the deterioration of relations between the Union and the Church, and the other two chiefs were leaving Alea for the Evil Moon Mountains. As iconic leaders of the Union, these three chiefs have always been at the top of the Church of Light's Divine Punishment faction's elimination list. In some ways, their threat is even greater than the higher-ranking demons from other dimensions that the Church constantly guards against. At least half of the demon slayers secretly cultivated by Gorus in the City of Grace are targeting them. Any attempt to enter the magical network in Rome to search for the missing first chief, Seraph, would likely be immediately detected by the Church's secret location methods, forcing them to face an overwhelming attack from the demon slayers. The enemy had come with the intention of perishable and unreturnable, so they wouldn't let him escape the magic net easily. If the Scorching Lord truly had an accident in the secret room, escaping directly into the magic net space with his flesh and blood, thus vanishing into thin air, Harvey thought he might be able to use the codename he left on the forum as an anchor to locate him. But how to retrieve him from the magic net was currently a mystery. Administrator Turing, Mr. Scorching Lord, you have always been a wise and knowledgeable member of the forum. Okay. I can try to locate him in the magic net, but regardless of his current state and location, you will need to figure out the solution yourself. Soul Reaper, thank you for your kind help. Mr. Turing, I wonder what the price we will have to pay for this? Harvey scratched his head, realizing that aside from a lack of money and manpower, he didn't seem to have much else to gain from the Union. The spells and magical literature required for his current rank and abilities were readily available from the Magic Encyclopedia. He could also easily acquire the precious materials and magical items needed for his experimental research by trading points on the forum. Administrator Turing, please pass this payment on to our agent. Don't forget our agreement. Give Mr. Kilthuzid as much help as possible. Gallagher turned his gaze from the crystal screen of the magic brain instrument, glanced sideways at Dawson, and sighed. It seems the forum truly values the training of their agent. Harvey exited the magic network forum and said helplessly to Arsterlin, who stood beside him, it looks like tonight will be another busy, sleepless night. All work and experiments will have to be put aside for now. With that, he walked over to the energy focusing array instrument and allowed Arsterlin to assist him in installing the energy lines and metal hood. With a constant hum of the energy focusing array, he quickly immersed his mental power into the magic network plane. The virtual projection and main model of the spellcaster forum remains within his magic pattern in a companion form. He simply needed to channel his mental power into it, as if entering a mental anchor, to quickly enter this virtual space composed of data and information. When Harvey was within the forum's projection of virtual space, he could completely control all the floating and moving information runes within it. They were originally composed of countless living source code, and they had a natural affinity for Harvey, the spiritual host of the space. With a simple gesture, several living code streams floated and gathered around him. Harvey picked up a random information code and found it was a purchase request posted by a new member in the anonymous trading section. However, this member was short of points and could only barter for the materials he needed for his magic experiments. The fixed and intermittently flickering stars in the forum's projection were actually the code names of various forum members. Dim ones indicated they were temporarily offline, flashing ones indicated they were currently surfing the forum, and the constantly lit ones indicated they were currently immersed in the adventure game Magic Tower, perhaps even actively spending money on card draws. Being in this space gave Harvey the illusion of having been uploaded to the internet via some kind of brain-computer interface technology, becoming a true digital being. If he so desired, Harvey could, at any moment, use those flickering code marks to locate the magic pattern of any forum member, infiltrate their innate magic pattern, and then, with his own powerful and strange mental power, erode their mental anchor. Or, drawing pure magic energy from the planetary energy array connected to his body, he could unleash a powerful energy beam shockwave through the magic network, directly shattering the opponent's magic pattern. This was truly a terrifying ability capable of slashing through the network to kill. Let's start with Mr. Scorching Lord's code mark. I hope he truly stumbled into the magic network space by accident and got lost somewhere. Harvey unsheathed 3 thick mental tentacles from his mental anchor and swept directly towards the member mark representing the Scorching Lord. They quickly enveloped the dim planet and gradually seeped in his mental power. Normally, Harvey wouldn't have dared such a risky move. Legendary spellcasters possessed unusually peculiar patterns. Even if one's mental power surpassed theirs, one still had to be wary of their potentially formidable backup plans. For example, Mr. Scorching Lord possessed more than one legendary artifact that could be projected into the ley. In the early days of the Spellcaster Forum, Harvey had stumbled upon Mr. Scorching Lord's pattern while roaming the ley. Back then, his pattern was in a strange state, a dim, faking death, hovering quietly near a rift in the otherworldly space, playing dead and fishing. Normally, no spellcaster would venture into the ley with their own innatal pattern, as it would expose them to unpredictable dangers and prevent them from escaping quickly. The most common method was to conceal the pattern somewhere, then project a mental line, using it to guide exploration. The distance traversed depended on the caster's mental power. But today, after using mental penetration to locate the legendary spellcaster, he discovered that the magic pattern was no longer in the same location as before. However, the location of the member code name still clearly pointed to the vicinity of the alien space rift, which was indeed a bit strange. The location hasn't changed, but the magic pattern is gone. Harvey looked at the empty entrance to the alien space rift in front of him, frowning in thought as he hovered in the distance. Why is this happening? The forum's location can't be wrong, otherwise I wouldn't have successfully attacked real targets through the magic network so many times before. Wait? He suddenly recalled the suspicion raised by the other 2 chiefs during their conversation about directly escaping into the magic network space in flesh and blood. Is there really a strange way to roam the magic network in a physical form? Harvey slapped his head. That's right. Those strange eggs I created on Soul Beach, that can hatch into soul puppets, weren't they physically present there? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271 The Legend of Ending Life. After confirming the possibility that the Scorching Overlord had materialized and entered the ley line, Harvey immediately decided to employ a localized tracking method to research the area where the legendary chief magic pattern had disappeared. This method was taught to him freely by Mr. Heart Demon, a native of the ley line. He claimed that every heart demon living within the ley line was adept at it. After all, there was no real-world concept of direction and distance within this distorted, high-dimensional space. Even a native species that had thrived for thousands of years could easily stumble into the darkness and vastness of space. Mr. Heart Demon's method leveraged the ley line creature's natural affinity for pure magical energy, revealing the locations of potential dark passages within any given area. These dark passages corresponded to the dense, crimson energy conduits that densely crisscrossed the space. Harvey understood these to be invisible energy channels, invisible to the naked eye. These dark passages also contained a rich, pure magical energy, but compared to the gentle flow of magic in the visible channels, the magical energy flowed at a much more violent rate. With the exception of special magical creatures like the demon spirits, no wanderer's mental projection could easily enter them. Even the inner demons that already lie there couldn't stay there for long. To use Mr. Inner Demon's words, once entering the torrent of magical energy in these dark passages, the wanderer's mental projection was like a clay sculpture that was quickly washed away and dissolved, while the inner demons were more like rounded pebbles in a river. Although they wouldn't melt, they would be swept away by the strong current. Only creatures like the demon spirits could freely move through them like fish, swimming downstream or upstream at will. The visible energy channels are like veins in the human body, while the hidden channels are probably arteries. This entire magical web is like the interior of a massive creature. I wonder if there's an aorta, or a heart at the end of a vein. Harvey was startled by the sudden thought that had crossed his mind. After careful consideration, he felt a chill, as if he were truly within the body of a prehistoric giant, like an infinitesimally fragile foreign parasite. He subconsciously shook his head, dispelling these disturbing thoughts. Then he dove into the Soul Beach, his spiritual anchor, and retrieved several living spirits that were being nurtured there. These spirits were constantly captured for him by Mr. Interdemon. They wouldn't survive long in the real world. On a whim, Harvey brought them all to the Soul Beach, but he didn't dare release them into the sea for fear of losing them. Instead, he found a few potholes on the reef and dropped them in. To his surprise, they actually survived, suggesting that the Soul Beach could also allow them to draw on the magical energy of the magical web for survival. Harvey held several writhing demons in his hands and carefully used his mental power to form a fine, ethereal net to shroud them. Then, with a flick of his hand, several large, tadpole-like demons instantly levitated. Their featureless, round heads gazed around as if sniffing, then nimbly twisted their bodies and swam toward a seemingly empty, hollow area. Demons weren't completely devoid of intelligence or thought. At least they knew that if they entered the gentle, visible energy channels, they would be more likely to be recaptured. Only by plunging headfirst into the surging dark passages could they escape. Harvey manipulated several thin threads of mental power, like a hunter stalking a hound through the wilderness, letting the demons pull them forward. The demons quickly arrived at the area and began circling a void. Finally, one of the larger demons, unable to bear it any longer, formed a strange, translucent bubble on the tip of its round head. The rest of the demons followed suit, each condensing bubbles of varying sizes from their heads. After detaching from the demon's body, the bubble slowly and freely floated forward, but soon, seemingly striking an invisible obstacle, they silently burst. In an instant, Harvey watched as the void before him melted, opening an irregular hole as if corroded. A powerful, dense, and powerful surge of magical energy erupted from it like a storm. This is it, the entrance to a hidden passage that only demons can open. Several demons, shaking their heads and tails, quickly dived in. Harvey's gaze narrowed, and he immediately condensed hundreds of fine threads of mental energy, tightly enveloping himself in a cocoon-like protective shell. He then allowed the demon to pull him into the dark passage. With the demon spirits blazing the trail ahead, Harvey had no fear of getting lost in the dense, spider-web-like tunnels. The spiritual power provided by his spiritual anchor was immense and inexhaustible. As long as he maintained his cocoon-like shell, he wouldn't have to worry about his main spiritual projection being washed away by the raging magical energy. Contrary to its usual practice, the demon spirits didn't follow the current of the raging magical energy, but instead twisted their bodies upstream. With these energetic hounds, Harvey followed suit, slowly and easily advancing in the direction of the surging magical energy. Surrounded by darkness, he could constantly sense the uncontrolled, pure magical energy pounding his cocoon, giving him the illusion of being transported through a massive artery. After struggling forward for about 10 minutes, the demon spirits, which had been pulled along, suddenly dispersed ahead, seemingly reaching a slightly wider fork in the dark tunnel. Harvey carefully extended his mental tentacles, avoiding the turbulent currents of magical energy as he groped for the area where the demon had suddenly stopped. A cascading, aged voice suddenly echoed in Harvey's mind. "Who is it? Who's here?" Harvey's heart leaped, nearly leaving the magical network in shock. It took him a moment to finally discern the voice that had just spoken. It seemed to be the missing Mr. Scorching Lord. But it sounded like he wasn't alone. Harvey tentatively responded with his mental power. "Is that Mr. Scorching Lord? I've been guided by Mr. Turing to search for you. Your sudden disappearance in the sky domain has caused concern among the other two chief ministers." A moment later, a deep sigh echoed, followed by a cascading, yet unusually incoherent, voice. You, shouldn't have come here, shouldn't have come to find me." What had happened to Mr. Scorching Lord? Harvey's mind was in a turmoil, but his mental perception alone was no way to fully grasp the other party's current situation. It seemed that he had been hiding in this fork in the dark passage since his disappearance. Mr. Scorching Lord? Are you trapped here? Or have you been attacked by a powerful enemy and sustained damage, preventing you from escaping? This time, the other party was silent for a long time before slowly answering, "No, powerful enemy, it's my own problem." The pauses in his voice became increasingly noticeable, as if with every word the Scorching Lord spoke, two people hiding in the shadows were parroting his voice, as comical as a parrot. Harvey suppressed his confusion and discomfort and pressed on. "Then why have you remained here? Did you enter the demonic network in a physical form?" "I can only take a chance with a method my teacher left me. Maybe there really will be a solution." The legendary chief seemed confused, repeating his words like a mumbling to himself, leaving Harvey completely unsure whether he was truly communicating. But his next words gave him the clue to the truth behind the disappearance. Superstar prophecy. Having learned that my lifespan was nearing its end, I was forced to attempt the ancient witchcraft, the ritual of merging flesh and soul. Chapter 272, Blood, Flesh and Soul Fusion Ritual. Is Mr. Scorching Lord nearing the end of his life? How could that be? He's the current first chief of the Union, a powerful spellcaster who had only just ascended to legendary status 50 years ago. Harvey vaguely remembered the first book on general magical theory his family magic tutor brought him during his initial magical initiation. It was compiled by the legendary chief, Salas, based on the fundamentals of ancient magic. The thick cover of the spellbook even featured a silhouette of his face, giving him a look of both wisdom and mystery. He couldn't have been more than 100 years old when he took on the important role of chief. After all, his teacher, the founder and first chief of the Spellcasters' Union, a mysterious legend whose name and origins were inexplicably obscured in magical history, lived for over 200 years. For high-level spellcasters, the extraordinary powers they gain from knowledge also elevate their lifespans. While they won't leap from a short-lived species to a dimension equal to dragons and giants, at least they won't experience the rapid aging and burial of ordinary mortals before a century. 300 years is the limit for short-lived species, but high-level spellcasters and those who have ascended to legendary rank can barely reach this threshold. Harvey made a rough calculation and found that Mr. Scorching Lord could be no more than 150 years old this year. He had personally spoken with him during his visit to the lair, and while he couldn't see his exact figure or face, his condition clearly indicated he was not at the point of old age. At least during that adventure in the magical web's dimensional rift, his combat prowess and mana far surpassed those of the other two high-level spellcasters. However, without divine nature like dragons and giants, short-lived species like humans, elves, dwarves, and demons, or immortal species with lifespans starting at 500 years like Asdalin and the Heart Demon, inevitably reach the end of their lives over the course of time. Even creatures of the sub-dragon variety, mingled with a touch of dragon blood, will, like the colorful sub-dragon remains Harvey encountered while exploring the dragon lair within the magical web, deplete their vitality and become a pile of skeletal remains. This is even more pronounced for human spellcasters. Once their lifespan reaches halfway point and they have no hope of ascending to higher levels, their bodies inevitably decline into aging and weakness. Even with the use of any other mystical potions that extend their lifespan, they can only barely survive for a few more decades, during which they must endure the pain and emptiness of their mana eroding and their mental strength draining away. Death is the ultimate dreaded outcome for all beings, especially those possessing wisdom and higher levels of being. Even for spellcasters possessing extraordinary powers, the ultimate goal of pursuing knowledge in the path of magic is ultimately nothing more than a leap forward in their lifespan. Thinking of this, Harvey couldn't help but sigh silently. Whatever accident had befallen Mr. Scorching Lord, leading to his approaching death, as a mere mid-level mage, he was likely powerless to avert it. Mr. Scorching Lord, the other two chiefs need to know your current situation. So after I find you, I must return to the real world to contact them and tell them the truth about what's happening here. Besides that, what else can I do for you? Harvey held great respect for this legendary mage, one of the first to join his forum and someone who had always been friendly to him. As soon as he finished speaking, a ball of warm, silvery white light suddenly shone before him, completely illuminating the dark passage. Not far ahead of him, several demonic spirits swirl around a floating figure. That figure was the source of the light, Mr. Scorching Lord's true flesh and blood. He had truly pierced the spatial barrier and entered the demonic network directly. But what terrified Harvey was that the other person's luminous form was connected to deep black tubes, like capillaries, extending from the barrier of the dark passage. From a distance, it looked like a terrifying humanoid centipede suspended in midair. The dense network of tentacles expanded and contracted in sync with the Scorching Overlord's renewed words, slowly wriggling as if possessed of life. Mr. Kilthuzid. I'm sorry to have to meet you again in this way. The Scorching Overlord, upon recognizing Harvey's features, seemed to regain some composure. His voice became more condensed, no longer punctuated by noticeable pauses. You've seen how I'm feeling now. Even if the other two chief ministers were here in person, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Harvey took advantage of the fact that he was still relatively lucid and asked, is this the flesh-soul fusion ritual you just mentioned? Can it really prolong your life? Then why didn't you return to the real world after completing the ritual? The Scorching Lord gave a bitter laugh and muttered, ever since I learned of this ancient and mysterious ritual, I've been repeatedly researching and studying it. It wasn't until recently, when my symptoms became somewhat unstable, that I finally decided to begin. But I forgot one most important thing. If the ritual is truly safe and effective, why didn't my teacher perform it himself? He paused, as if trying hard to maintain his sanity, and then continued, I successfully found the entrance to this secret passage using the method left by my teacher. The ritual went very smoothly. I almost completely reshaped my sea of consciousness and magical veins, reversing them to a new state. But then I discovered that I could no longer leave here. My body has been assimilated to the magical web due to the ritual, and I must constantly draw on vast, pure magical energy to sustain myself. If I leave the dark passageway within the magical web, where the magical energy is most abundant, I'll be like a fish out of water, drying up and dying in minutes. Harvey was stunned by these words. He had never imagined the terrible price Mr. Scorching Lord had paid for his rebirth. This was likely the main reason he was trapped here, unable to send a warning or call for help. According to his description, if he returned to the real world, he would simply be unable to cross the space and draw enough magical energy from the magical web in his flesh and blood to sustain his transformed body. This level of magical energy couldn't be achieved through meditation and absorbing magic stone energy alone. Based on Harvey's perception of the magical energy abundance within this dark passageway, in the real world, Mr. Scorching Lord would likely need to connect to at least 3 massive planetary-scaled energy-gathering arrays simultaneously to avoid death from mana depletion. Wait? Planetary-scaled energy-gathering arrays. A flash of lightning suddenly flashed through Harvey's mind, and an idea that even he found incredible emerged. If Mr. Scorching Lord was connected to several planetary energy-focusing arrays like a ventilator, and then operated continuously at maximum power, continuously drawing pure magic energy from the magic network to supply his body's needs, could he be successfully transferred back to the real world? Mr. Scorching Lord, I may have a way to help you escape from here, Harvey said in a deep voice, trying hard to control his excitement. But we'll need the help of Mr. Turing and Mr. Noamon. I can mediate this matter. After all, the Federation and the Spellcaster Forum still have a good cooperative relationship. I believe they won't sit idly by. Chapter 273 Demon Infusion Experiment. Harvey concluded his conversation with the Scorching Lord, bid farewell to the chieftain, who had been unexpectedly trapped in the Leyline's dark passages, and quickly escaped back to the real world. Removing the heavy metal energy shield from his head, Harvey immediately sat down before the Leyline's computer and reconnected with the 2 Union chieftains, who were eagerly awaiting his news. Kilthuzid, gentlemen, with Mr. Turing's guidance, I have located the location of the Scorching Lord. You are correct, he has indeed materialized into the Leyline space and is currently trapped due to some unforeseen circumstances. The 2 chieftains, currently in Black Rock City, quickly received the news. The shorter Dawson slapped his thigh and turned to the black-robed Gallagher, angrily saying, as expected, that fellow, Seraph, took the risk and attempted that ritual. Soul Reaper, why is he trapped? Did he encounter a church demon slayer who ambushed him in the Leyline? Legendary mages are almost all Leyline wanderers capable of self-preservation. Precisely because they fully understand the unknown dangers of Leyline space, they tend to be more cautious and less likely to encounter misfortune through reckless exploration. Kilthuzid, there was no attack from the church. Mr. Scorching Overlord's accident occurred entirely while performing some dangerous ritual. I can fully confirm this. Harvey paused for a moment, carefully formulating his words before continuing. Kilthuzid, my lords, please forgive me for seeking a solution for Mr. Turing's rescue without informing you in advance. The Forum has agreed to undertake the rescue due to my request. Gallagher was stunned for a moment, looking at Dawson in disbelief, and said hesitantly, has this guy changed his nature? He doesn't talk about business all the time. Is this at the instruction of the Forum, or is he expressing goodwill to us on his own behalf? Dawson stroked his gray beard, thought for a moment, and said softly, after all, he is the agent of the Forum. No matter what his attitude and purpose are, he must not go against the Forum's consistent position. This at least shows that the Forum is still biased towards us, not completely neutral. He stood up and paced back and forth a little anxiously, sighing, this guy, humph, he used the power of the Forum to get a big favor for himself. Now we are probably going to owe him more. But the situation with the church and the demons is so tense now, it is impossible for them to let the first chief be trapped in the alien space and do nothing. Even if Salus himself has not been involved in many affairs within the Federation for a long time, the loss of a legendary spellcaster is a loss they cannot afford. Shadow Knight, whatever the cost of the Forum's rescue efforts, we can discuss it later. Mr. Kilthuzid, the most important thing now is how to rescue His Excellency the Scorching Overlord, Kilthuzid. Right now, we need to find a safe, large-scale magicite mine that's completely under the Federation's control. I can't help you with that, so you'll have to rely on yourselves. What? A large-scale magicite mine? Dawson, losing his temper, stood up and pointed at the crystal screen of the magic brain instrument, angrily saying, "Look at this. It's still a business deal. He's asking for a huge sum of money, wanting us to directly hand over a magic stone vein in exchange for Sereth's safety." Gallagher rolled his eyes speechlessly and pointed at the subsequent text that appeared on the crystal screen. "Can you read it first before you get angry?" He said, "The rescue site needs to be set up in the mine, Kilthuzid. I need to set up the necessary equipment and venues for the rescue in the magic stone vein according to Mr. Turing's instructions. You are also responsible for providing all the equipment and materials used in it." Dawson's face flushed instantly, and he said angrily, "That's more like it. The equipment and materials should have been our responsibility." After a lengthy discussion with the two legendary leaders, Harvey learned that the Federation had discovered a magical stone mine in the mountains surrounding LA. While the reserves and yield quality currently explored were not as high as those in the new mines in the Evil Moon Mountains, it was at least large enough to meet demand and fully under the Federation's control, ensuring safety and secrecy. Harvey then needed to immediately begin preliminary experiments for the rescue operation, how to set up a planetary energy gathering array and connect it across space with the Scorching Overlord trapped in the Dark Passage, using the magic power extracted from the magic stone mine to rescue him from the magic network. To construct and activate a planetary energy gathering array, a crucial requirement was a natural magic stone mine producing pure magic energy. There was no other way in the real world to provide sufficient energy for such a massive magical energy transmission device. Harvey's secret mine, deep within the Divine Spine Mountains, was actually a more suitable location than the one owned by the Federation, but he wasn't ready to go that far with the Federation. Furthermore, bringing a legendary spellcaster right next to him would probably frighten him to sleep. "Sir, why must this infusion experiment be conducted in the Divine Spine Mountain base? We already have several planetary energy arrays within our territory," as Dallin was puzzled after hearing Harvey's experimental plan. Harvey patiently explained, "The planetary energy array within the territory cannot afford to malfunction for even a moment. If it overloads and overheats, shutting down, not only will the people's daily energy supply be immediately cut off, but all the equipment and alchemy beasts in the production plants will also be out of action. Every minute of downtime is a huge economic loss for us. We don't need to pay such a high price. The energy array in the Divine Spine Mountain underground base only powers the equipment that converts liquid mana. It's more than enough to power a living tunnel boring machine that drills through the mountain all day long. The remaining energy can be used for magic infusion experiments." At dawn, Harvey, without delay, arrived at the Divine Spine Mountain base with a team of personal guards and Asdalin. The base director happened to be on leave back in the territory, so Pep, the head of the engineering department, temporarily took over the command of the territory's exploration. Upon receiving the news of the Lord's surprise inspection, the engineering team leader, always covered in dust and sweat, hurriedly jumped out of bed and rushed to the base gate to greet him. "My lord," Pep stood at the door a little bewildered, waiting for the Lord to start his lecture. In the past 3 months, they had almost driven the shield machine until it started smoking, but still hadn't found the magic core that the Lord had mentioned. Also, because of the overly radical drilling plan, a small-scale landslide occurred in a small section of the deep tunnel. 2 shield machine drivers had their limbs broken. They had just undergone mechanical prosthetic limb transplant surgery and were still lying at home on work-related injury leave. "My lord, everything is normal at the energy ranch, but the search for the magic core still has no clue." Harvey walked past a trembling Pep without looking away and patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry about the magic core for now. Stop all the blood-summoning instruments and shield machines. I want to do an experiment with the energy gathering array." Chapter 274 Technology Outsourcing Business. 3 days later, in a mountain valley about half a day's journey from LA, Fran McCollin, the magic shield, received a last-minute assignment and secretly arrived with a team of core members of the Ministry of Magical Affairs. This was the largest vein of magic stone independently controlled by the Federation, aside from the Devil Moon Mountain mines. It had been discovered and mined for over 30 years. Previously, nearly all of the southern continent's high-grade magic stone production was firmly controlled by the dwarves of the southern hills. The Federation had considered waging war to seize it, but human spellcasters simply didn't possess the same affinity for magical minerals as the burrowing dwarves, making it impossible to accurately locate the veins from hundreds of meters beneath the murky earth. Furthermore, the dwarves had developed centuries of mining technology. This vein, however, was completely different. The high-grade ore was located at a very shallow depth, with some branches even exposed to the surface. After the Federation dispatched a mage warden to eliminate the numerous companion beasts entrenched in the area, it was a natural progression for them to seize it. This event completely broke the dwarven monopoly on raw magicite ore, allowing the Union to control the internal magicite trade with human spellcasters. The importance of this mine is self-evident. Before arriving, Fashield was only informed by Chief Dawson that the Union had reached a technical outsourcing agreement with Forum Agent Kilthuzid, assigning him responsibility for coordinating the reception of incoming magical technicians. Other details were kept secret. However, he harbored a suspicion that this incident was closely related to the recent mysterious disappearance of First Chief Thalis. For the core members of the Union, the chief's disappearance was no longer a secret controlled solely by a few high-ranking officials. Several internal groups, including Fashield himself, had long been discussing the matter privately and had expressed their opinions. Some believed that Thalis, suffering from the after effects of the damage to his magic pattern caused by a previous research accident, had used his disappearance as an excuse to secretly retreat and seek treatment. Some also speculated that, given the current tense situation with the Church, the chief might have been subjected to a series of covert attacks from large numbers of demon slayers. Such covert battles involving legendary spellcasters wouldn't be resolved overnight. However, Fashield believed that regardless of the truth, if the chief didn't appear to stabilize internal sentiment, if time dragged on, those within the Union, traditionally double dealers, would likely begin to discredit the Union, claiming the legend had unexpectedly fallen. Upon seeing the figure emerging from the continental teleportation array in the mining area, Fashield finally confirmed that the purpose of this collaboration was more than simple. Mr. Kilthuzid? You've come in person. Seeing that it was the familiar Mr. Fashield who greeted him, Harvey forced a stiff smile across his pale face, manipulating his soul puppet. Mr. McCollin, long time no see. With many other Union members present, S.H.I.E.L.D. couldn't act too familiar with him, lest their close personal relationship be exposed. So, he regained his composure and spoke in a businesslike manner. Lords Dawson and Gallagher have issued special orders for our full cooperation in this collaborative experiment. Please feel free to ask for anything you need. He saw that the other party had brought only a dozen or so men, most of whom were muscular and well-built, clearly mages with awakened bloodline powers. They were likely responsible for Mr. Kilthuzid's personal safety and transporting the numerous heavy wooden boxes he had brought. It seemed that the coordination of the experiment would ultimately fall to his own Ministry of Magical Affairs spellcasters. Harvey, clad in a deep black hooded robe, smiled softly and said to S.H.I.E.L.D., "Then let's not waste time and begin the experiment immediately." Before S.H.I.E.L.D. could inquire about the specifics of the experiment, Harvey added softly, "Next, please have Mr. McLean arrange for the mine to be cleared and all relevant personnel and spellcasters to leave." A mid-level spellcaster standing beside the magic shield immediately stepped forward and demanded, somewhat dissatisfied, "Mr. Kilthuzid, even if the experiment doesn't require our cooperation, this is still a mining area controlled by the Federation. You're driving us away as soon as you arrive. Isn't that a bit disrespectful to the Federation?" His lead was immediately echoed by the other younger spellcasters. The Federation was the premier and massive organization in the southern continent's magical world, and those who could enter its internal system were all elite spellcasters trained by major wizarding families and spellcasting academies. They had always been the only ones who discriminated against and looked down upon others, and had never experienced such neglect and disdain as today. Fadden had just taken over the position of Deputy Director of the Affairs Department not long ago. He was able to quickly rise to his current position thanks to the fact that he and several chiefs were members of the Forum. He had not even sorted out the complicated factional connections within the Affairs Department, and was unable to suppress this group of arrogant Federation elites. Harvey didn't care. He looked around at the group of indignant spellcasters in front of him, chuckled and asked, "Everyone, the cooperation agreement mentioned in this mission, didn't you all know the specific details in advance?" The guard took out a stack of thin paper pages from the briefcase and handed it to Harvey, who picked it up and shook it lightly. The so-called technology outsourcing refers to the magical knowledge and experimental technology required for this experiment, which the Federation does not currently have. So there is no point for you to stay here. You might as well save some energy and go to the station outside the mining area to rest. Right, you. This is a naked provocation. I will never accept such an insult. I want to fight you with magic. A young spellcaster hadn't finished speaking when he was immediately hit in the face by a spell from the magic shield. It was a palm-sized ice silk spider web that stuck directly to his mouth. Only then did everyone realize that their new supervisor, Mr. McCollin, who usually had a stern face but a generally mild manner, was actually a high-level spellcaster. While he might be a research mage with limited practical experience, he was still a high-level spellcaster, far more formidable than the group of mid-level mages just transferred from the Evil Moon Mountains. "Shut up. Do not be disrespectful to Mr. Kilthuzid," Shield barked, unusually furious. "Everyone, follow the chief's orders and evacuate the mine with me." The new supervisor's direct words silenced everyone, though they still glared at Harvey with hostility. "Wait," Harvey suddenly called out, stopping everyone as they prepared to leave. "Since everyone is concerned about the technical difficulty of this experiment, why not have Mr. McCollin and this gentleman, who first raised an objection, stay and observe as witnesses?" Chapter 275 Saving the Chief. Fadden and his companion stood at the edge of a vast, pre-cleared underground mine, looking down from afar at the busy men at the bottom. They had actually begun constructing a makeshift teleportation array directly on the exposed ore vein. The patterns on the array appeared unusually large and complex, unlike the more common spell patterns. "Corey, you were too reckless and rude just now," Fadden couldn't help but reprimand his subordinate in a deep voice. This mid-level mage named Corey came from a large family of spellcasters in Isengard, the kingdom of the cavalry. He was also an outstanding student at the Alea Academy of Magic, the continent's most prestigious magical institution. He had been directly recruited into the Union upon graduation and had just returned to Alea after completing his rotation in Black Rock City. Such talented mages with high aspirations were not uncommon in the Union. His background and lineage rivaled those of any other spellcaster of his generation, not to mention his exceptional magical knowledge. He was no mere wielder of connections. HMPH. I don't mean to be ungracious, but this Mr. Kilthuzid is truly arrogant, completely disregarding the Federation's reputation and speaking out in a provocative and outrageous manner. Despite his superior's accusations, Coley defended himself. Shield sighed and said calmly, "To be honest, he's not being arrogant. It's just that as a high-level spellcaster of the same rank as me, every word he says is the truth. We really can't help much, huh? He's also a high-level spellcaster?" Coley was stunned. He had never expected that a young man in his early 20s, looking pale and frail, his own age, could actually be a high-level spellcaster a full rank above him. His face flushed crimson, and he stammered, unable to utter a word. "It's absolutely true. He's not only a high-level spellcaster, but one who's mastered both alchemy and the elemental arts. That standard magical weapon, the Lance of Annihilation, that you've been bragging about to your colleagues since returning from Black Rock City, was crafted by him." Shield cast a meaningful glance at Coley, whose face had turned terrified and shocked. He continued, "So don't blame me for being so unbecoming just now. If I'd let you say you wanted to challenge him to a magical duel, haha, you're descended from a great wizard family, so you should know the consequences of a low-ranking wizard colliding with a high-ranking wizard, right?" Coley took several steps back, realizing only then that a layer of cold sweat had formed on his back. Believing he'd in great trouble and offended a high-ranking wizard, the young spellcaster was about to find an excuse to flee when a powerful surge of magical energy emanated from the depths of the mine. Are they activating a teleportation array?" Fadden muttered, bewildered. "No. That wasn't some ordinary, small, short-distance teleportation array. Nor was it an ordinary, continental-scale teleportation array. But the increasingly powerful fluctuations of magical energy indicated that the large array, anchored by a brass base at the bottom of the pit, was now in teleportation mode." Suddenly, Coley recalled some ancient array knowledge he had learned at the Magic Academy, and tremblingly speculated, "Mr. McCollin, Could they be creating a long-lost, extra-dimensional teleportation array? Could this be the magical technology the young high-ranking mage had mentioned, a technology not even possessed by the Federation? At this thought, Coley instantly focused his attention, his gaze fixed on the complex array pattern engraved on the brass base, attempting to memorize it with his spellcaster's powerful memory, so that he could study and emulate it again and again. But within moments, he felt dizzy and a stabbing headache nearly brought him to a state of collapse. The strange formation diagram would periodically distort and shift, as if coming to life. This shift wasn't completely chaotic, but rather characterized by a strange pattern and order. Stop trying to record and analyze the formation's structure. Beware of backlash. It could damage your sea of consciousness and your spiritual anchor. Shield supported Coley's back with one hand, preventing him from falling backwards in disgrace. At the bottom of the pit, Reiner, wrapped in robes, held a list of plans and directed the bloodline warriors to bring down the large alchemical components that the teleportation formation delivered every few seconds. Then, they hurriedly began assembling them. Sir, the planetary teleportation array, constructed using living source code, is truly incredibly efficient. I thought it would take a whole day for the parts for the energy-gathering arrays to arrive here from the territory. Several bloodline warriors opened the dozen or so boxes they had brought, revealing intricately crafted, pocket-sized wolf spider alchemists within. They spontaneously emerged from their boxes and, sliding their 8 legs, quickly joined in the assembly of the energy-gathering arrays. 3 brass-colored, planetary-scaled energy-gathering arrays, resembling giant cylinders, were quickly assembled. Reiner carefully removed 3 thigh-thick silver-white metal shafts from the last box delivered from the teleportation array. These were the core power source for activating and operating the energy-gathering arrays, and the energy shuttles that enabled the equipment to freely connect the real world with the Leline. Harvey had consumed a dozen adult human spirits as conversion material, extracting their souls into these 3 rune-shaped shafts. 3 energy-gathering arrays were arranged in a V-shape, surrounding the brass-based teleportation array in the center. After installing the rune axis using a wolf spider alchemist to crawl into the energy-gathering array's column, Harvey stepped aside, picked up a pre-prepared energy connection line, connected it to the metal hood, nodded to Reiner, and then put it on his head. Since Harvey had left his location coordinates in the hidden passageway of the magic network space before leaving, connecting the rune axis transformed by the demon spirit easily opened the entrance to the hidden passageway and directly reached the area where the Scorching Lord was trapped. Mr. Scorching Lord? How are you feeling now? Harvey used his mental power to carefully awaken the legendary leader. The burning overlord, floating in the dark passage like a humanoid centipede, began to emit a soft glow. An old, halting voice rang out, Mr. Kilthuzid, so soon? Have you already found a way to save me from the forum? Harvey responded confidently, yes, rest assured. This is the method taught to me personally by the forum administrator, Mr. Turing. I verified it repeatedly through experiments over the past few days. And it shouldn't be a major problem, the burning overlord sighed softly. Any adventure carries the possibility of failure. But that's not important. Compared to being trapped in the chaotic darkness of the dark passage for so long, even if something unexpected happens during my attempt to return to the real world, I can completely accept it. He paused, muttering to himself in a daze, the longer I stay here, the more I feel my sanity is being eroded by some unknown force. If I can't escape soon, I'm afraid that in a short time, I will completely lose my mind and become a parasitic monster in the dark passage, obsessed with absorbing magic power. Harvey nodded, saying nothing more. He transformed his mental power into numerous tentacles and reached out, establishing a preliminary connection with the now fully open sea of consciousness and mental anchor of the Scorching Overlord. Even for a legendary spellcaster, letting down all defenses and accepting the intrusion of another's mental power would be extremely dangerous. However, Harvey currently held the special status of a forum agent, and he had always clearly favored the small group formed by the Federation within the forum. Therefore, the Scorching Overlord believed that the other party's efforts and goodwill in rescuing him were worthy of his unconditional trust and the trust of his own safety. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.